this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
I'm Amanda Knox, and in the new podcast, Doubt, The Case of Lucy Letby, we unpack the story of an unimaginable tragedy that gripped the UK in 2023. But what if we didn't get the whole story?
Evidence has been made to fit.
The moment you look at the whole picture, the case collapsed.
What if the truth was disguised by a story we chose to believe?
Oh my God, I think she might be innocent.
Listen to Doubt, The Case of Lucy Letby on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hi, it's Jill Winterstein, host of the Spirit Daughter podcast, where we talk about astrology, natal charts, and how to step into your most vibrant life. And today I'm talking with my dear friend, Krista Williams.
It can change you in the best way possible. Dance with the change, dance with the breakdowns.
The embodiment of Pisces intuition with Capricorn power moves.
So I'm like delusionally proud of my chart.
Listen to the Spirit Daughter podcast starting on February 24th on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
This is Special Agent Regal, Special Agent Bradley Hall.
In 2018, the FBI took down a ring of spies working for China's Ministry of State Security, one of the most mysterious intelligence agencies in the world.
The Sixth Bureau podcast is a story of the inner workings of the MSS and how one man's ambition and mistakes opened its vault of secrets.
Listen to the Sixth Bureau on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Clayton Eckerd. In 2022, I was the lead of ABC's The Bachelor.
But here's the thing. Bachelor fans hated him.
If I could press a button and rewind it all, I would.
That's when his life took a disturbing turn. A one-night stand would end in a courtroom.
The media is here. This case has gone viral.
The dating contract.
Agree to date me, but I'm also suing you.
This is unlike anything I've ever seen before.
I'm Stephanie Young. Listen to Love Trapped on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hey everybody, Robert Evans here, and I wanted to let you know this is a compilation episode. So every episode of the week that just happened is here in one convenient and with somewhat less ads package for you to listen to in a long stretch if you want. If you've been listening to the episodes every day this week, there's going to be nothing new here for you, but you can make your own decisions. Welcome to It Could Happen Here, the podcast where we spend all of our time talking about skincare. Now, personally, and a lot of people say this is a bad idea, I enjoy using concentrated chlorine with a little bit of ammonia. It just cleans the pores, it cleans the grout, it gets all of that pesky code out of your lungs. An entire generation of British and German and French boys all agree chlorine gas does the trick. How are we doing? What's this episode about?
Hi,
bad.
welcome to It Could Happen Here, a podcast about things falling apart and how we can maybe put them back together. I'm
good.
Garrison. I'll be leading this sode. With me is Chris and this random person that we brought on from the street named Robert.
Yep.
And we'll be talking about some things that are not great and kind of current problems.
We sure will.
So I spent a lot of my formative youth lurking, studying, and kind of documenting some of the bad places on the internet. Nazi chat rooms, trans sites, hate Facebook hate groups, whatever, all the things. And growing up in Portland, Oregon, in like the 20-teens, this was something that felt kind of foisted upon me. As a kid, discovering my own queerness and coming out of an extremely homophobic, insular Christian community. Meanwhile, in Portland, having self-described fascist march alongside gay-hating Christians on my city streets, Nazis murdering people on our public transit. That put a lot of fellow scrawny gay kids to put on black hoodies and balaclavas. To mace and fight far-right extremists that were like 2 to 3 times their size. But the problem is, of course, 100-pound depressed teens aren't necessarily the best brawlers under some circumstances.
Although they can handle a fire extinguisher filled with paint pretty well.
That's true. But a lot of us also started doing like online research and stuff. To find like the names and addresses of like fascists and members of hate groups and all that kind of stuff. I still remember the kind of the thrill and the buzz of my first like big find as a baby online lurker. I think it was the leader of the Hell Shaking Street Preachers, who was living in Tillamook, Oregon at the time.
Fucking prick.
That was the first guy I did. And I remember being very excited because he was a massive asshole. So yeah, he's like a very extremely homophobic quote unquote street preacher.
Just a big old chode.
Yeah. But a lot of like this like online research work wasn't just cross-referencing social media posts with the white pages, property records, and voter registrations to send nice postcards to hate group members. Time was often spent tracking the use of like memes and cataloging and sharing fascists' plans for projects and events, keeping tabs on like their current propaganda trends that online white supremacists were trying to push. And One of the things that I came across about 2 years ago was called Operation Pridefall. This is one of these like it was an organized campaign ran by people on 4chan, Discord, and Telegram. I came across it a few days after the plans were published online. And if you already know what Operation Pridefall is, or have heard that term before, and if you're like me and we're on similar online spaces, you've probably found the past few months of anti-queer propaganda, the massive increase in the gay and trans people are groomer shit, and the Shutter's kink at pride discourse to be all very, very predictable, a strangely familiar, like the worst case of deja vu, and in large part the result of years of work behind the scenes by social engineering, online bigoted trolls, and self-described fascists. So we're gonna talk today about kind of the overlap between this thing called Operation Pridefall, the groomer discourse, and how that kind of feeds into kink at pride discourse. So 3 things that are not great, that don't go great, that actually do kind of go great together.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, yes.
So, first of all, a little background on the whole recent groomer thing, because we haven't actually discussed the groomer stuff in depth on the pod yet.
We sure haven't. You know why we haven't? Because I hate it. It sucks.
It's just true. I mean, like, whenever like horrible things happen in the news, I try to push back on just releasing an episode immediately covering it in case we have something like actually good to say. So we've kind of waited to talk about the groomer discourse stuff for a long time, and I think now is totally fine to do so, because we've had months to let it simmer, look at like the types of things they're encouraging, look at all of like the physical action they're trying to do, and with Pride Month approaching, we're going to see a resurgence of it in the next few weeks here. So, as mentioned in our week-long War on Trans People episodes, which was released like right before the new wave of the groomer shit accelerated. But in those episodes, we talked about the long history of conservatives and evangelical organizations promoting the false narrative targeted at parents and like concerned citizens that gay people, especially gay men, are more likely to be child predators than their heterosexual counterparts. Along with the idea that queer people are out to, quote, groom your definitely 100% straight child into being gay, right? So insinuating that they can then like have sex with them or something. But yeah, they're trying to scare parents to be like, gay people are out to get your kids. So it's the actual like idea of what being a groomer means changes based on who you're talking to. In part 2, I'm gonna quote a conservative writer who like admits this as such, but still defends the use of the term. Because at the very least, if they use grooming within the context of turning your, again, absolutely completely heterosexual child into a gay person, thus they would, begin to hate you and resent you as a parent for your godly Christian values. They also consider that grooming. It's not actually just...
As a general rule, the attitude is if they do not turn out to be the exact kind of weirdo Christian as their parents, they were groomed by somebody, and it's merely a matter of picking the person to blame.
Yeah, and all of that sort of rhetoric was extremely popular through like the 80s, the 90s, and the early 2000s. But then came the Knots in the 2010s, and this kind of had an attitude shift, and some of that started to go away. We got Queer Eye, we got Ellen. The rate of conversion therapy started to decline. It was getting banned in more states. There was more queer acceptance in certain sects of the church even. Of course, gay marriage went national in 2015. And eventually being like aggressively homophobic became like not a good look. It was not, you were not able to do that anymore, and still be able to have and do it as like nonchalantly as you used to be able to, whether that's in your like TV show or whether that's you as a corporation, or some random other sectors of public life. But then of course Trump got elected 2016, year after gay marriage went national, and then there's this resurgence in far right extremism, and the more kind of commonly accepted kind of nonchalant gay bashing of old gets passed down to the next freak down the line, which is trans people. So with that, the adage of like the disgusting groomer freaks are going to turn your kids gay turns into the gender ideology freaks are going to turn your kids trans. It's all the same stuff, just passed on to the next thing. So we have that like anti-trans and therefore anti-queer hate festering for a few years. And this inevitably opens up the door to just a revival of classic homophobia. Even liberals, like friend of the pod, J.K. Rowling, and lots of the original TERFs got to apply the same homophobic rhetoric to trans people and gender non-conforming folks, which then obviously results in that propaganda and rhetoric being used to attack LGBTQ people on a whole once again. So it's resurrecting these old homophobic tropes and just applying it to a new generation of queer people. And so for this next part, we're gonna talk about libs of TikTok, because they did play a big part in what some current discourse is today. And I promise we'll get to Operation Pridefall here shortly. Just hang in there with me. But before we talk about again other friend of the pod libs of TikTok, do you know what else it wants to turn your kids gay?
Oh, are you talking about the Washington State Highway Patrol? Because yes, they absolutely do, Garrison. That's the one guarantee the Washington State Highway Patrol makes. They'll make your kids gay.
Okay, libs of TikTok joins the fight.
Let's just take a moment to acknowledge how fucking frustrating it is that we have to discuss seriously libs of TikTok, that it matters.
I know.
Like the worst.
It's terrible. It's terrible.
People always criticize the show for being like, why do they talk about all these dumb social media things? So like, yes, I know that they're stupid, but the bad part is that they actually matter.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about him because of the 17-year-old trans girl in Texas who just got assaulted by like 5 dudes because she was blamed on the shooting, and she was blamed for the shooting because in part of a lot of shit that libs of TikTok helped to stir up. Because they proved there was a market for it, that if you're like a right-wing shit grifter, attacking trans people is a great way to get engagement. Anyway, sorry, Garrison.
Yeah, so Libs of TikTok is a social media account turned social media campaign started in April of 2021 by a Brooklyn area real estate agent named Chaya Raichik, who, by the way, attended the January 6th attempted fascist insurrection. When violence broke out that day at the Capitol, she actually tweeted a play-by-play on a previous Twitter account of hers, posting videos from the crowd and talking about tear gas and rubber bullets being like shot right next to her. And then after she left the riot, she tweeted on Twitter that the event was peaceful compared to a BLM protest. So that's yes. Anyway, five people died.
We've now reached the part of it. We're now in tragedy of as farce of the thing that happens in every single state that goes fascist, where all the fascists try to do a coup and it fails, and then nothing happens, and then they take over the state like 3 years later. Except our version of that, instead of like, I don't know, weird fascist Yakuza guys, it's the libs of TikTok.
It is the libs of TikTok. So the libs of TikTok was around like the third attempt by Rychik to start a viral social media account. They're saying third time's the charm, but in this case, it actually was. So the account's gimmick is reposting and often grossly misrepresenting select clips from quote-unquote libs on TikTok. Big shocker, big surprise. But more often than not, that really just means posting videos of queer kids and trans people, captioning it with something reactionary, and then leading a targeted harassment campaign against those individuals. On May 31st, 2021, so just about a year ago, she made her first grooming-related post, just tweeting, "Stop grooming kids," in all caps. This is the first time she tweeted anything related to grooming. The day before that, she tweeted a video of a trans person alongside the vomit emoji and a caption that just says, "Men should not wear dresses, you can't change my mind." Her first super viral video related to LGBTQ people was later in June, next month, during Pride, by posting a TikTok of a kid explaining the concept of gender fluidity, a pretty basic concept. But she Libs of TikTok commented, "This is so messed up in so many ways." Her post racked up 500,000 views and indicated to her that the way to grow her little social media project into a right-wing viral sensation was going to be with homophobia and transphobia. This is how she decided to continue her online career, essentially. She called the prominent LGBTQ youth suicide prevention group, the Trevor Project, a grooming organization. And towards the end of 2021 and into 2022, she kept using that term, grooming, groomer, at an ever-increasing rate, right? It starts in like May and June of 2021, continues throughout the summer and fall, and then in the fall and winter, she starts really kicking up all of the stuff around grooming and queer people. I mean, all of her posts are already mostly about trans people and like trans people at schools. Obviously, she was a big part of like the whole school board thing from last year. So, but towards the end of 2021, though, is when the groomer thing started becoming more of a recurring trend. Quoting Slate. Toward the end of 2021 and into the new year, Rychik found her rhythm with memes and videos calling LGBTQ people and those who supported LGBTQ youth, quote-unquote, groomers. She has even attempted to smear one of the most prominent gay men in the country as a groomer. In a deleted tweet, Rychik's account accused Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg's husband, Chasten, of grooming kids for his work at supporting LGBTQ youth organizations.
This isn't fair, but I hate that his name is Chasten.
I know.
I don't like that name. I don't like that name.
I'm not
sorry.
a big.
That has nothing to do with anything.
I'm not a Chasten stan either, but
oh,
yes.
It's so shocking.
But yeah, it's like finding the most prominent Libby gay men and being like, "Hey, these people probably groom kids," and that obviously riles up their base.
Yes.
She's called for any teacher who comes out as gay to their students to be, quote, fired on the spot, which actually has happened since then.
Sure has.
This has happened multiple times since this account has been launched. The account's popularity grew alongside last year's racist, homophobic, and transphobic attacks on school boards across the country. She would often posting videos of queer teachers and lying about them grooming kids into being gay or whatever. She was promoting organized harassment campaigns against those teachers, interspersed with tweets and screenshots of news articles about teachers who sexually assaulted students. Importantly, not posting the article, but just like a screenshot of the headline along with comments like, "Funny how this keeps happening," which is like neglects to mention that like all these incidents are from heterosexual teachers. Or like that one story from last year of a cop and his wife, who was a teacher, working together to sexually abuse children. Like none of them are actually about gay people. It's all like,
I mean, I'm not certain if a school resource officer has ever stopped a mass shooting, but I know that something like 50 of them have been fired for molesting kids.
Yeah, but
so
like it's really insidious because she's posting all this stuff about teachers grooming kids, into being like queer teachers grooming kids, like alongside headlines of teachers actually sexually assaulting kids, but those headlines are all of stories about heterosexual teachers. But she posts both of those things. So it's to have this correlation for her audience, despite them not actually being related. Because libs of TikTok sure ain't posting about how cops should be kept away from kids for the safety of the children.
They're never going to post about how many people who do the grooming stuff have been arrested, because like several of the organizers of this whole like gay people or like grooming kids thing like have been arrested for child abuse since this started, which never gonna show up.
No, it's not. It's never going to matter. But, posting and lying about queer teachers grooming children next to headlines about teachers sexually abusing kids to manufacture this correlation, which is, of course, false, but it's still highly effective. Now, believe me, I would love to not talk about Twitter nonsense, but unfortunately, Twitter accounts like Libs of TikTok actually do play a massive role in shaping offline conservative politics. Libs of TikTok was very soon being interviewed by New York Post, being boosted by Joe Rogan, going on Tucker Carlson. Other Fox News hosts like Jesse Waters began featuring content straight from the Libs of TikTok Twitter feed. And Tucker encouraged his viewers to follow the account before it's banned if you want to know, quote, what may be happening in your child's school. Last March, when Libs at TikTok posted a video of a woman teaching sex ed to kids in Kentucky, preteens or whatever, she called the woman a predator. And the next evening, the same clip was featured on Laura Ingram's Fox News program, with the host saying, "When did our school, any schools, become what are essentially grooming centers for gender identity radicals?" So this is just content straight from Libs of TikTok being put onto the most watched news programs in the world. And as we'll see, also being taken in by some of the most powerful conservative politicians. Mainstream conservative politicians quickly joined in the tooting of the Libs of TikTok grooming horn. Obviously, Ron DeSantis is a big part of this. One of Florida Governor Ron DeSantis' top aides and press secretary is a huge fan of Libs of TikTok and is in frequent communication with them. Quoting the Washington Post, quote, "By March 2022, Libs of TikTok was directly impacting legislation. Ron DeSantis' press secretary, Christina Pershaw, credited the account with, quote, opening her eyes and informing her views on the state's restrictive legislation that bans discussion of sexuality or gender identity in kindergarten through third grade, referred to critics as the Don't Say Gay bill. The bill has been, unquote." So this bill has already been used to get middle school teachers fired for saying that they are not straight. And you'll notice that middle school is not in kindergarten through third grade. So remember when we were all saying, hey, it actually doesn't matter that the bill says it's only up for kindergarten through third grade. It's just going to be applied for anyone. Yeah, turns out we were right. So the bill's already been specifically cited in the firing of multiple teachers from Florida for just not conforming to the heterosexual Christian hegemonic worldview. And Libs of TikTok is still currently among the most prominent influencers affecting actual material conditions and shaping both the rhetoric and propaganda while impacting legislation. Friend of Libs of TikTok and DeSantis' press secretary, Christina Pershaw, has said, quote, "The bill that liberals inaccurately call Don't Say Gay would be more accurately described as an anti-grooming bill. If you're against the anti-grooming bill, you probably are a groomer, or at least you don't denounce the grooming of 4 to 8-year-old children. Silence is complicity. This is how it works, Democrats. This is how it works, Democrats, and I didn't make the rules." So yeah, see how we have see how that works? You call the Don't Say Gay bill a anti-grooming bill, so then anyone who criticizes it is now a groomer. Isn't that a fun way to play with words? Isn't that nice?
That is a fun way to play with words, Garrison. I love it.
So the past few months, we've seen this, queer people are groomers meme reach seemingly never before seen heights. And at the very least is the highest and most mimetic it's ever been in the past 2 decades. It's really building off of all of the kill your local pedophile shit, right?
It sure is.
Robert, do you want to briefly talk about kill your local pedophile?
I mean, it's a bunch of bumper stickers. It's a slogan. Like, I know dudes who are not at all fascists and say that because they're like new dads and they're horrified at but like the whole, like the core of it is this right wing, and it kind of started off in like the sort of libertarian gun nut communities, but it's really used a lot as sort of, it's a group that you can talk about doing anything to. You can talk about killing, you can like fetishize murdering. And if you can then like define other groups as inherently pedophilic, then you can do anything to them, right? Like that's the basic idea is if you get people saying it's always okay to use vigilante violence against this group, and obviously no one's going to fucking defend child molesters, but then you start making the case that people who are not in fact molesting children are somehow pedophiles or, you know, or somehow related to pedophiles. And then suddenly it's okay to kill them. It's okay to do violence.
Massive social groups like
yeah,
all of gay and trans people. So if you conflate these two things, you're able to make these things represent the same thing in someone's mind. That makes homophobia now not a bad thing, but like a moral imperative. Like you have to be homophobic because these people are grooming children.
Yep.
And you get this interesting thing too, which like there are people who are like not quite as far in who will say I see things a lot where it's like someone's like, oh well, I don't have a problem with gay people, but like they shouldn't groom kids, and it's like,
yep,
that's not what's happening, bro.
Yeah, no.
Do you know what else doesn't groom kids?
I mean, the Washington State Highway Patrol definitely does, Garrison. But let me tell you, if you want somebody to groom your children, the Washington State Highway Patrol will do that. But you know what they won't do? Is protect those children in the event of danger, because that might endanger them. So,
no, well, look. Sometimes, right? Someone is killing your kid, and you need to get pepper sprayed.
Mm-hmm.
And when that time calls, you will beg for the Washington Highway State Patrol.
Well, you'll beg for a different police department, but when those police get in trouble because of their failure to act, then the Washington State Highway Patrol will show up to protect those cops.
Anyway, here's some ads. We are back. So as the queer people are groomers shit was reaching the most mimetic and the highest rate of trending that it has had in decades, this past April, at the height of the recent increased wave of anti-queer legislation and anti-LGBTQ rhetoric, this is when some terminally online teenagers tried to start kink at pride discourse once again. And I do not want to talk about this, but I've written stuff about it, so I'm going to.
This was legitimately when I was like thinking about, I like realized I was gay, and I was like, oh my god, I should come out. And then one of the things that I spent a long time thinking about was, does this mean I have to do kink at pride discourse?
And
this is like a serious consideration for me.
For a long time, I would have said no. Of course not. I'm never going to do this.
But
Why
no,
would I do
we're
that?
doing it live.
But here we are. So, anyway, doing kink at pride discourse then and even still now, while the anti-queer onslaught is accelerating at the highest pace it's had in years, sure seems to be like dumping fuel on the fire. What's up with that, kids? Why? So anyway, the discourse itself revolves around whether kink apparel or paraphernalia render the pride space unsafe for minors or quote-unquote non-consensual observers. Heavy quotation marks there, by the way. But also it is heavily rooted in assimilationist and respectability politics and a push for LGBTQ people to be seen as more acceptable or more normal while still existing in a heteronormative society. And now, obviously, I'm not a fan of this discourse happening in the first place, especially now. Like, why are you doing it now during all the groomer stuff? Stop it. Stop it. Don't do that. Quit it. Why are you doing this? But first of all, I also want to point out how this entire discourse runs on the same train of thought that fuels all of this groomer stuff in the first place. It's picking at the same part of human brains. So I'm gonna read this post that went super viral about a month ago that sparked the new wave of this much frustrated discourse. Quote, LGBTQ youth being uncomfortable with kinks at pride is not homophobia. Kinks at Pride might have been fine if this was still the 1900s, where adults were the only ones attending Pride, but it's not the 1900s anymore, and now kids are way more involved in celebrating our identities. The celebrating our identities part there is really important, and we'll talk about this more soon, but largely in the past 20 years, there's been this shift with queerness and sexual orientation being less about who you fuck and more like a personality aspect or a social identity with a branded aesthetic. It's which is in some ways good. Like it's some ways good that people are more able to express themselves however they want. But, kids at school aren't getting bullied for being gay anymore, which again is good.
Well, less than they were.
They're getting bullied less, somewhat, depending on where you live.
Yeah.
But it's also it's made people forget the whole gays bash back or gays don't bash back but shoot first. It's forgot. We don't have that's not as a core component of queerness anymore, because queerness is now able to be kind of more safe and sanitized. And it's a personal identity in a way that it's not just about who you fuck anymore. It's like this personal identity aspect. Which I'm not saying is bad. It's just that there's this thing that's happened that's changed the way we talk about sexual orientation. Hey, quick pause. This is Garrison from the future here, just popping in to clarify a bit on what I mean regarding this note on identities and identifying as various shades of queer. What I'm getting at is that when observing some of the baby queers around my age, or maybe a bit younger, queerness is seen as a more available option for young people when putting together their personality or sense of self, and more separated from the nitty-gritty details of who you fuck, now that queerness is generally more tolerated. Now, don't get me wrong, I do like the idea of being free to choose queerness. In many ways, I consider myself as having chosen to be gay. The thing about framing that as your quote-unquote personal identity, as opposed to simply choosing to be what you are, is that the former lets you wield that quote-unquote identity against other people or other queer people that disagree with you. It's this thing where queerness is filtered through the lens of brands and brand recognition, which is definitely made worse by social media, dating apps, personal profiles, and personal bios. And it's part of this cultural push to have everyone create their own personal brand. And I don't want to identify as genderqueer. I just am genderqueer. I don't identify as gay. I just like cat boys, therefore I am gay. It's a different ontological framing, and one that I think is less susceptible to heteronormative assimilationist ideas and the capitalist marketing to queerness as a brand or as a market demographic. If your queerness is a personal identity that's more sanitized, more approachable for a heteronormative society, then you get to use your identity to attack gay people whose queerness is more based in deviant sexuality and alternative communities. I'm gonna read the follow-up tweet to this thing that sparked the new discourse. Quote, "Not even all LGBTQ adults are comfortable with seeing kinks at Pride. There's nothing stopping you guys from adjusting or having after events strictly for adults who want to partake in that. Y'all need to adjust so that every LGBTQ person feels comfortable attending." So let's just do some queer history here for a sec. The first Pride was a riot. On that night in June in 1969, nice. The police raided the Stonewall Inn, one of the largest private gay clubs in the U.S. at the time. The patrons of the bar, trans women of color, homeless queer teens, drag queens, lesbians, and leather daddies, fought back. Lots of trans teenagers threw bricks at cops, and a fair number of those trans teenagers were also sex workers. Kink, including, leather daddies and lots of aspects that we now view as kink or BDSM, has been a part of Pride since its literal inception, way back in 1969. And while drag isn't considered kink now in 2022, it still is considered sexually deviant, but back in like the 20th century, in 1969, New York City still had laws that prohibited cross-dressing. So drag used to be way more kinky than it is now. And like basically all queer sex used to be unacceptable kink. And many
it was illegal. It was literally illegal.
Or just a crime. And
it was a crime in Texas until
like
the
2003.
year
I think the law's still in the books.
Right around when I graduated high school.
2003 was when the Supreme Court said
also,
that it's no longer an enforceable law.
Also,
in the
it might go back
Texas,
to being
it's
illegal
again.
and
It's illegal. It's still illegal to own more than 5 dildos.
Yeah, is it 6 or is it 5?
I think it's 5, but it might be 6.
So like all queer sex used to be unacceptable kink, and many logistical aspects of gay fucking used to happen in public. I'm gonna quote an article from them.us. Quote, "For some people, gay rights and gay liberation do not hinge on particulars of sexual desire. For years, I've heard that we aren't just our erotic identities. But for many of us, it does begin there, and it does revolve around the ways we organize our erotic choices. Before LGBTQ plus people had pride parades, our community spaces were not just bars, but cruising spots like bathhouses, dungeons, and public restrooms. It should be no surprise that many queer folks find their sex lives and their sense of community to be intertwined. BDSM, subversive sexuality, and leather culture have enjoyed a long history within the LGBTQ rights movement. They are inherent expressions of queer culture and sexuality. Being free to signal your sexuality out in the open within a queer context is the entire point of pride." Unquote. So, like, all of this discourse around pride and kink at pride reflects a modern but regressive idea that sexuality is inherently damaging to see, experience, or think about in a public context, especially if that sexuality is inherently queer. And there's this other idea that we see a lot of in this type of discourse, and it's mirrored a little bit with like the groomer stuff too, that if you see someone quote unquote engaging in kink, and like in the case of pride, that's like what? Wearing a collar, a harness, or a pup mask, that just the act of observation is somehow a violation of consent. And it's really frustrating because indication of sexuality in a non-vanilla sense, while in public, is not a violation of consent. Like, I didn't consent, quote unquote, consent to see the rainbow cops, right? But public indication of sexuality is not a consent violation. And again, indicating sexuality is like the entire point of pride. Weaponizing quote unquote consent to call out people that we see but don't interact with, who are quote unquote dressed too sexual in our own mind, is bad for multiple reasons. It also potentially dilutes legitimate claims of non-consent in cases of actual sexual violence. And it's like this thing, like, if you look at someone in a pup mask, there is no consent violation there. That's a really weird thing that people talk about, and it's not like, I'm not trying to start fights on the internet with like these tender queer children. Because like, and I don't want anyone to find like these like, you know, months old posts and start harassing these people. But that post has like over 30,000 likes and thousands and thousands and thousands of retweets. And it basically just repeats like old queer bashing talking points that conflate kink and queer visibility with public sex that endangers children. And like, conflating gays being visible and semi-clothed with being like dangerous to children are the same talking points that it gets used for book bans, conversion therapy, and the Don't Say Gay bills, right? This idea that if you look at a gay person shirtless, that's dangerous to a kid. That's the same underlying motivation that fuels all of this groomer discourse. It's the whole thing where it's like, I'm okay with gay people, I just don't want to see it, right? It's like that idea in and of itself is like is still like exists on that, you know, I didn't consent to look at it type of thing. You know, there's this other tweet from somebody being like, forcing people to see kinky stuff without consent is really weird. I'm sorry, but I don't want pup masks at pride events for families. I saw that shit in real life and it made me uncomfortable. Don't involve other people in their kinks if they don't consent. And like, looking at someone in a mask isn't involving you in any of these kinks. If you're looking also, at someone in a leather mask, like if that makes you uncomfortable, that's your problem, not anyone else's.
You don't have a right to not be uncomfortable with how people look or are in public. Look, every time I go out into the world, I see something that makes me uncomfortable. I see a lot of people with children. Now, do I think it should be illegal to have children? No,
yes,
but
I do.
is.
I do think that it should be.
It should be illegal, exactly. So look, we all have to deal with things that make us uncomfortable.
Look, we have a clear solution here. The way to deal with events not being family friendly is to get rid of families.
That's exactly right. We have to eliminate the concept of the family.
Yeah, come on. Communist Manifesto. This is 101 shit, people. We can do this.
You were quoting from the Communist Manifesto, huh? Okay, that's interesting. That's not where I got it from.
But I feel like a lot of these people, many of them like young teens, who are complaining about being forced to look at quote unquote inappropriate things at Pride, have never actually been to a Pride.
Yeah.
Because most of modern Pride is like really sanitized and chill. Like it's like it is overrun with corporate sponsors, politicians, and cops. Like you are way more likely to see armed police at like a Pride march than you'll be likely to see like tits or like gags or whatever. Like
it's funny to me because like I started going to these, and this is before the internet was what it was or moral panics were what they were. But like in Texas, I would go to these events where there would be people of all ages and families. These are like little burning regions. People would be like at like on the big night when people are doing like the fire shows and the fireworks stuff, people would be like fucking and like manning flamethrowers, like while having sex. There was a whole chunk of it that was just like the kink row, and you could walk down it and watch people get like whipped and fuck a Sibian and stuff. It was just like, I don't remember any of this fucking, like the only discourse was like, well, okay, we should probably like make sure that people know where that kind of stuff mainly happens so that like they don't have to walk around it if they don't want to. But like it was.
But yeah, it's like this idea that like not even full nudity, but like semi-nudity within a queer context is inherently more dangerous to children if it's in a queer context than a straight context, right? We have all of these, even like queer kids complaining online about being forced to see things at Pride, which is like they would see way more skin if they went to like a beach in the summer. Like it revolves on the same homophobic idea that like if you look at these things in a queer context, that is like more adult than looking at it within a straight context.
Yes. It's, I don't know, frustrating.
Like, it's frustrating. And like another reason why that I think many of these like baby leftist genderqueers who are crusading against kink at Pride and complaining about like leather or like sexy underwear. Lots of them even first of all, most of them, I think lots of them haven't been to Pride because there hasn't really been Pride for the past 2 years, and lots of these people are like 15 years old. But a lot of them also just like admit to never be going to Pride because they're too terrified to see a pup mask. Like they openly say like I've never been because I don't want to see these things. Like sure, you're allowed to do that, but then don't campaign against kink at Pride, which will result in your posts getting used by like homophobic trolls and bigots.
I don't go to Chicago because I don't want to see a deep dish pizza, but I don't try to ban them. Like I understand that that's the thing you people like.
Like the first time I saw a pup mask was at fucking Comic-Con. Like it's like it's not, you don't see like ban pup masks from Comic-Con. Like what? Like these people, like these kids are basing their fears off of like a few viral photos that are often shared in a disingenuous context. Now we'll talk about these photos in a bit. But, you know, these people are like 15 years old, have never been to Pride, and are just like simply terrified of like actual sexuality. Like they engage with queerness as like a personal identity and stuff. But once they get into like the nitty gritty of like sex, that makes them really uncomfortable because they're teens, because they're kids. That's okay. You can be uncomfortable with sex. That makes sense. That is appropriate for your age. But then don't make your entire online presence about trying to shut down this massive aspect of queer history. Because like the kinky stuff that I've seen at Pride is on par with what you see at Comic-Con. I often will see more nudity at Portland's Comic-Con than I will at any of the Pride events I've been to. Like all of the more like openly like fetish folks or kinky folks are really responsible and act pretty appropriately at Pride. And the people who like say otherwise online generally just have not actually been to Pride in their entire life. Because like this complaining about quote unquote like inappropriate fetishes or like kinky conduct is basically code for I am uncomfortable with you being positive about the way you view sex, and I want you to not show it, and I want you to not talk about it, which is the same underlying thought process that people use to be homophobic. It's the exact same thing. Now, a lot of this discourse oversimplifies kink and BDSM. Right, queerness can be about love. It can be about sexual attraction, and both. Or sometimes for like asexual people, lacking one or the other, or both. But by that same token, right, kink, leather, and BDSM aren't all exclusively about sex. To a large extent, they're also about community building. And I just think these like earnest think of the youth arguments are very silly. Because even when it comes to youth, because if you're uncomfortable with things, that's totally fine. But in a lot of cases, like queer teenagers also have sex, generally with other queer teenagers, sometimes even in a kinky context. And that's okay. Pride is about celebrating everyone's individual ability to do that. And I don't like it when people just rehash old homophobic talking points and especially during all of this groomer discourse, because a key part of kink, a key part of like queer sex is consent. And once you start conflating what consent is by saying that me looking at you wearing a collar is a violation of consent, once you start undermining what consent actually means, that's like not a good thing. It's actually that is actually a bad thing, especially right now during all of the groomer stuff. So that is we've gone kind of over on time here. But we're gonna make this a two-parter. In the next episode, we'll talk a bit more about like tender queers, and we'll actually get into the plans of Operation Pridefall and talk about how we kind of got to this point. Because, man, there's a lot of kids sharing pictures online, and oh boy, do those pictures originate in some dubious places. So that does it for us today. We will see you tomorrow. Pride's fun. We should not police what other people do. So yeah. Anyway. Bye.
Bye.
Hi, this is Jill Winterstein, host of the Spirit Daughter podcast, where we talk about astrology, natal charts, and how to step into your most vibrant life. And I just sat down with a Minnie Driver.
The Irish traveller said when I was 16, you're going to have a terrible time with men.
Actor, storyteller, and unapologetic Aquarian visionary. Aquarius is all about freedom loving and different perspectives. And I find a lot of people with strong placements in Aquarius are misunderstood. A Sun and Venus in Aquarius in her 7th house spark her unconventional approach to partnership.
He really has taught me to embrace people sleeping in different rooms, on different houses, in different places, but just an embracing of the isness of it all.
If you're navigating your own transformation or just want a chart side view into how a leading artist integrates astrology, creativity, and real life, this episode is a must listen. Listen to the Spirit Daughter podcast starting on February 24th on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
China's Ministry of State Security is one of the most mysterious and powerful spy agencies in the world. But in 2017, the FBI got inside.
This is Special Agent Regal. Special Agent Bradley Hall.
This MSS officer has no idea the U.S. government is onto him. But the FBI has his chats, texts, emails, even his personal diary. Hear how they got it on the 6th Bureau podcast.
I now have several terabytes of an MSS officer, no doubt, no question, of his life. And that's a unicorn.
No one had ever seen anything like that. It was unbelievable.
This is a story of the inner workings of the MSS and how one man's ambition and mistakes opened its vault of secrets.
Listen to the 6th Bureau on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
In 2023, a story gripped the UK. evoking horror and disbelief.
The nurse who should have been in charge of caring for tiny babies is now the most prolific child killer in modern British history.
Everyone thought they knew how it ended. A verdict, a villain, a nurse named Lucy Letby.
Lucy Letby has been found guilty.
But what if we didn't get the whole story?
The moment you look at the whole picture, the case collapses.
I'm Amanda Knox, and in the new podcast, Doubt, the Case of Lucy Letby, we follow the evidence and hear from the people that lived it to ask what really happened when the world decided who Lucy Letby was.
No voicing of any skepticism or doubt.
It'll cause so much harm at every single level of the British establishment of this is wrong.
Listen to Doubt, the Case of Lucy Letby on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Clayton Eckerd, and in 2022, I was the lead of ABC's The Bachelor.
Unfortunately, it didn't go according to plan. He became the first Bachelor to ever have his final rose rejected. The internet turned on him.
If I could press a button and rewind it all, I would.
But what happened to Clayton after the show made even bigger headlines. It began as a one-night stand and ended in a courtroom, with Clayton at the center of a very strange paternity scandal.
The media is here. This case has gone viral.
The dating contract.
Agree to date me, but I'm also suing you.
Please search warrant.
This is unlike anything I've ever seen before.
I'm Stephanie Young. This is Love Trapped. This season, an epic battle of he said, she said, and the search for accountability in a sea of lies.
I have done nothing except get pregnant by the Bachelor!
Listen to Love Trapped on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to It Could Happen Here. This is part 2 of our discussion on Operation Pridefall and the Kink at Pride discourse and the groomer stuff and how they all combine in this really horrifying, really way that I wish they didn't, because it's pretty frustrating. So last episode, I talked towards the end. I talked a decent amount about genderqueers, and I actually would like to define this term here, and kind of get into why these people are boosting these specific like talking points that are just kind of regurgitate old types of homophobic stuff. They claim it doesn't, but like it does. You're using this exact same logic. You're just kind of reframing it. So genderqueers are this the type of like, they're kind of like an in-joke for like the queer community of this like personality type. Generally, the genderqueers are like typically a Gen Z or a millennial queer, more likely to be like femme, whether that be like a woman, non-binary, or femme person, lesbians, femme bisexuals, pansexuals, or like queer soft boys, kind of. They feature this like combination of personality, designation, and aesthetic. And they're known for being especially adept at using like watery language of therapy as a means to like get out of most things. Everything's about like holding space and healing and intimacy. And it's like, it's wrapped up in this like jovial, pastel, bubbly package, right? If you throw in some astrology, some like corduroy overalls, shaved heads, and round glasses, and you got yourself like a basic genderqueer. And a little quote here from an author named Daisy Jones from an article that they made. Quote, "Just like the straight soft boy who uses performative sensitivity to get away with being a little shit sometimes, so does the genderqueer. Genderqueer generally refers to a trope in the queer community of a queer person who presents themselves as being sensitive, hyper-vocal of their feelings, sometimes thought of as prioritizing feelings in hyper-intentional language over their own harm and privilege." So they kind of use like identity politics to avoid accountability. There's like this competitive oppression and self-victimization. They center themselves and their feelings in social or political movements that aren't necessarily about them. They prioritize ineffective methods of self-care. They utilize like gaslighting and dumping the emotional labor of dealing with your own self onto others. Like genderqueers are they're known to like mask toxicity and manipulativeness in the performative language and aesthetics of social justice. They have this like performative soft hypersensitivity and use identity politics to kind of call out or avoid things that make them uncomfortable, and will publicly declare those things as problematic in an attempt to force others to conform with their own will. So that's why I describe a lot of these like younger teens who use these talking points against quote unquote kink at Pride as genderqueers, because like they're people who are really sensitive about what makes them comfortable, and they try to avoid or campaign against anything that makes them uncomfortable. And they use all these like performative turns of phrase and talking points to avoid having actual discussions about it. It's this like weaponization of their marginalized identity as a shield to avoid accountability or to deflect against people challenging them for abusive behavior, or in like the Pride case, this like internalized homophobia. There's these little tweet exchange from some people on the super viral Kink at Pride post from a month ago. I'm 14 and I don't want to see a half-naked person in leather straps and a gag at an event I take my family to. And someone replied, like, try glancing at a Mardi Gras or even a public beach before you apply homophobic double standards. And then the poster replied, you think I'm homophobic? I'm literally a trans non-binary lesbian. So again, this is what I mean when I talk about genderqueers, right? Someone's calling them out for applying this homophobic double standard on how they view like public semi-nudity, right? Not even like full nudity, just like how they view public semi-nudity, like a bikini or something, right? And then they respond by saying, I'm literally a trans non-binary lesbian. And then went on to say, also, people at those don't wear kink shit. And it's why I don't go to Mardi Gras or large public beaches. It makes me uncomfortable. Seeing a bunch of adults in kink shit being sexual just physically makes me ill. People at Mardi Gras and public beaches don't act sexual or wear kink shit. And so, like...
I feel like you haven't been to Mardi Gras, but that's just outside of the point.
You will see way more skin at a public beach. Most kink shit requires covering your body in a lot of extra stuff. Mm-hmm. Like, if you're wearing a harness or like a latex full leather outfit, you're like showing way less skin than someone wearing a Speedo or a bikini. So maybe you're just uncomfortable with people expressing their sexuality, which in case, don't go to Pride, because that's what Pride's all about. That's the entire point. But yeah, the whole point, like, I'm literally a trans non-binary lesbian. Like, that's like such a perfect encapsulation of what the genderqueer kind of trope is. And like not many people like self identify as genderqueers. It's kind of this joke that the more kind of punky queer community has kind of, it's like we're putting a label on this behavioral trend that we've observed, and it's kind of a joke, right? I'm not trying to call out specific people. I'm not, if you are soft and emotional and sensitive, cool, whatever, do whatever you want. I'm fine. Just don't use these things as a shield to justify forcing your will onto other people.
It's like, cool to not, it's totally fine to like not like people being publicly affectionate or like doing public, like it's perfectly fine to be uncomfortable with that. It's perfectly, like, that doesn't mean anything bad. It doesn't mean you're a prude. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. But like, there's nothing wrong with people wanting to be public with that at a public event, celebrating the fact that they are now less oppressed for doing that thing. Like,
yeah.
Or a beach or Mardi Gras.
And like, make sure you're cognizant if you're engaging in any kind of like socially normalized ideas of like straight stuff is inherently less sexual than gay stuff, right? I advocate people being able to like get into their own head and figure out why they think certain things. Like this, it's this like idea of meta thought, trying to think about why you think about things. So if you're more uncomfortable with two men kissing than you are with than one man and a woman kissing, you should think about that. You should be like, even as a trans non-binary lesbian, if you're more uncomfortable looking at two men kiss, you should think about what social conditioning has caused this to happen, because that's something that people have been pushing for a long time, is that, yeah, gay stuff is like more adult or more mature than queer stuff. And I think that's a big part of these types of things being at Pride, is like pushing back on that idea. So like, I think, and the reason why we see more of these now is like, there are these baby genderqueers who grew up in a world where you were less likely to get fucking assaulted for being gay, while also growing up on the internet in the age of Tumblr and Instagram, right? These kids were able to construct their own comfortable, safe bubbled versions of reality online, only being exposed to what they want, when they want, right? They get to only view it things that they find aesthetically pleasing. And the pandemic certainly heightened this, right? With people being forced to solely exist in their self-catered online worlds. So now with the outside world opening up, some of these soft baby genderqueers are going through puberty and are dealing with their quote-unquote uncomfy feelings. And the added notion of being exposed to things that you have specifically not sought out, like that causes them to be uncomfortable, right? If you're a femi person who's just attracted to other femi people, having to look at dudes be affectionate may not be your cup of tea, and you may not like enjoy it, but that's like, it's just as queer as you are. So you can't prioritize your queerness over somebody else's. It's like there's this collection of baby gays that gets uncomfortable being reminded that people, like especially people whom they are not personally attracted to, have sex. It's like if they're reminded that this happens and they don't like it, it's like it feels like they have this sort of like anxiety just about just looking at something that they perceive as sexual in nature, right? And for them, this includes other but differently queer people wearing leather or being semi-nude, like dudes being shirtless or women being shirtless. For like, I think that's a whole other double standard that should be pushed back upon. But like, again, Pride's not any more naked than people at the beach. So it's not actually, they're very selective in the types of things that they will focus on. And it plays into this notion that's used by all like anti-gay legislation that gayness is inherently more sexual than being straight, right? It's more sexual, it's more mature, it's more adult. Because for a long time, being gay was exclusively seen as like a hypersexual deviant act. And now, especially among Gen Z baby queers, being queer is now less tied to specifically the act of sex, right? Queerness is much more of an overarching personal identity now, especially as it intersects with like gender and stuff, right? You know, whether that be non-binary, other stuff like pansexual, bisexual, what have you. But to kind of circle back to the kink at Pride stuff, people want us dead for being queer. It doesn't fucking matter if someone's parading around in a collar. If you're uncomfortable, you should maybe learn to actually fight back against people who actually want to kill you. Like, Pride was a riot. You should sort out your uncomfy feelings elsewhere, or direct your uncomfy feelings at the people attacking us. So maybe don't prop up kink at Pride discourse when accusations of queer people being all groomers is at an all-time high, and there's fascists organizing to like shoot us at Pride marches. So maybe consider that before you do discourse on twitter.com. I'm going to do one little quote and then we will have an ad break. I'm just going to end this section with a quote from them.com again. Quote, "Kinks, sex, and protest are all inherent parts of Pride. One of the core tenets of Pride is liberation and working against cultural shaming. Calling to, quote, not perform your kinks and fetishes at Pride because some minors are there and kink can, quote, sexualize the event, unquote, implies that celebrating sexuality and kink is openly bad, and normalizing these things should be a goal of Pride. BDSM, subversive sexuality, and leather culture have enjoyed a long history within the LGBTQ rights movement, and such public displays of sexuality are driven by much more than libido or countercultural impulses. They're an inherent expression of queer culture and queer sexuality, and as such, deserve a place at Pride as much as anything else." Okay, and now it's time to actually get into what the title of these episodes is about. The Operation Pridefall stuff. We're gonna talk about this thing that sucks. So whether you're looking at the conservative groomer discourse or the tender queer kink at Pride discourse, you'll see a lot of the same logic, as well as a lot of the same photos. We've talked a lot about memes on the show, and I'm not gonna get into like the power of memes very much right now. But suffice to say that like a picture can stick in your head a lot easier than a bunch of words can. And throughout the groomer and kink at Pride shit, there are a few select photos that people use to demonstrate their opinions on how gay people are a threat to children. Either there's just pictures of adults in like kink-associated garb, usually like full latex bodysuits or pup masks, or and there's these like, specifically like there's these two specific pictures of kids just like standing next to adults who are wearing pup masks that get used a lot. There's also a lot of pictures of like drag queen story time, and whenever I see any of these very specific pictures, I flash back to when I first came across the original Operation Pridefall 4chan thread back in 2020, because these are actually all of the exact same pictures. So Operation Pridefall was a cyber harassment campaign started on 4chan targeting the degeneracy of the LGBTQ community by attempting to sway public opinion against queer people by linking being gay to grooming and pedophilia. So checking back in 2022, oh boy, has things happened. So initially organized on 4chan, Discord, and Telegram right before Pride Month, the campaign set out targets and methods to flood the social media platforms of gay venues, Pride sponsors, and LGBTQ people or supporters with spam, anti-gay memes, and media, usually photos, intended to imply a link between being openly queer and the grooming of children, and operating online under the banner of Operation Pridefall. The campaign started on May 10th, 2020, when an anonymous 4chan poster posted a thread on poll outlining Operation Pridefall, which was pitching it as a crowdsourced campaign aimed at damaging the LGBTQ community during the month of June in 2020. The plan centered around, quote-unquote, red-pilling users in the comments sections of companies that support LGBTQ causes on social media. The 4chan post read, quote, every June, hundreds of massive corporations band together to smother social media in posts in flavor of Pride Month, a code word for the degeneracy that is LGBT activism. Many of these accounts are rather small and get very little engagement, yet they continue to post without backlash. Beginning on June 1st, the goal of Operation Pridefall is to get on Twitter, Instagram, etc., and drop a shit ton of disturbing red pills on homosexuality on the comments of the lesser-known pages. The bigger pages are okay targets, but posts tend to get unnoticed in the sea of other comments. Commenting on smaller pages, ones with less than 100 likes and so, means anyone who views it will see the posts and companies will reconsider their pro-pride posts afterwards, unquote. So, if you scroll through the archived initial Pridefall thread, you'll see a crowdsourced collection of pictures that they intend to flood the internet with under, in the comment section of posts discussing Pride or discussing LGBTQ activism or whatever. So in this crowdsourced collection of photos, we see a lot of drag queen storytime stuff, but many of these pictures and memes are now the same ones used both in the recent groomer thing and in the past 2 years of Kink at Pride discourse. It's the exact same photos. There's hundreds of them. There's hundreds of photos of people in pup masks, whatever, waving pride flags. There's a lot of them, and the specific ones get used for so much of the groomer shit. And they really started to gain much more visibility during 2020 after the Operation Pridefall thing got launched. The Operation Pridefall 4chan thread also instructed users on how to set up fake phone numbers, to make burner accounts, to comment on these social media pages. There's another really interesting part that the Operation Pridefall planning stuff detailed was on Discord, on the Operation Pridefall servers and channels. The users were planning to repurpose cringy TikTok videos while relabeling them with anti-LGBTQ captions and hashtags. Here's a quote from their planning Discord. An additional idea: we can red pill Zoomers on TikTok and literally build a fucking puppet army to fuck the shit out of millennials. We should expand this operation to as many social media outlets as possible in order to maximize effort. Let's operate like this. On TikTok, convince any Gen Z sibling or relatives to do some kind of shitty jester, charade / whore dance, and then add LGBTQ critical captions on top of it and repost it under trending hashtags. So you see elements of this exact strategy mirrored 1 year later in Libs of TikTok by getting videos of people being, I don't know, kids and like kind of cringy, because kids are kind of cringy, but videos of kids on TikTok and mischaracterizing, TikTok videos and adding LGBTQ talking points on top of them to sway the public opinion of queer people. It's the exact same strategy. A similar idea was also implemented alongside setting up fake dating app profiles to not only spread their anti-gay kind of grooming memes, but also to farm viral content by catfishing gay people and getting them to like be in embarrassing interactions. Another quote, on Tinder, Bumble, and Grindr, set up fake profiles with legit convincing images and descriptions that criticize LGBT. So it's trying to catfish queer people and like then I guess spam them with pictures of these like grooming memes and see what their reaction is, then post it, right? It's so the whole Operation Pridefall strategy might appear pretty simple, right? It's like basically glorified shitposting, setting up a bunch of fake sock puppet accounts and demonizing queer people in the comment section of small corporations and influencers. But there definitely is a lot more to it than that, right? There was this element of like planned escalation, starting off first as like appearing as reasonable commenters, right? Acting in very good faith, just as somebody concerned by kids being exposed to sexual materials, whether that be, people in drag at a library reading books or people at a pride parade, right? So instead of immediately going on like full 100% gay bashing, saying that we should, kill all deviant trans people, which a lot of conservative commentators just say now, like Elijah Schaffer, who just posts memes about wanting to kill trans kids. These bored fascists on 4chan tried to coordinate a slow, more insidious approach, which they would hope would just gradually turn the tide of public opinion against queer people. Here's a snippet from one of the Pridefall organizing chats. Quote, "Keep it normie, palatable, and friendly. This means no Nazi or Hitler shit. The goal is to make them question whether what they're supporting is really the right thing." So as Pride Month progressed, the Pridefall participants coordinated on 4chan, Discord, and Telegram to slowly increase the frequency and intensity of the campaign. Another quote from the organizing chat. Quote, "Think about it as waves. Day one is simply questioning homosexuality, and then as the days goes on, it will get worse and worse until the end of Pride Month." So, in terms of physical things they actually had, I believe Operation Pridefall resulted in a few gay events getting shut down. There was like this event at, I think it was like at a queer nightclub in the UK that got shut down. There was a few other like obvious like material results that they had by doing this harassment campaign against venues and corporations. But I think they were more successful in, first of all, spreading specific mimetic images that are now commonly used in the grooming stuff and in the Kink at Pride stuff, some of which these images were not really used in discourse before, but now are commonplace. I think that's really where more of this idea succeeded. So over the course of the month, they wanted to get more regular people to start associating members of the LGBTQ community with pedophilia. And in order to do that, the way they see it is by just gradually shifting this discussion. And then as public opinion alters, they hope that brands will distance themselves from the LGBTQ community and stop doing more pride shit. Right? It's like that was another big part of what their intention was. And they may not have done all of that stuff immediately. Like they may not have succeeded in that, but they definitely did succeed in the prevalence of the images that they were trying to intentionally spread, because that absolutely has happened. Do you know who else loves implanting ideas into your brain? That's right. The products and services that sponsor this podcast. Woo, go buy their product or get a job at one of the you know what I'm talking about. Anyway, here's the ads. And we are back. Wasn't it fun reading about Operation Pridefall? Didn't that just bring joy to your ears?
I'm so happy.
Me too.
Joy to so many parts of me.
Yeah. So, as we mentioned, a big part of their attempts to sway public opinion is by spamming photos and memes that attempt to showcase just how dangerous gay people are to children, whether that be drag queens doing story time at a library, photos of gay people doing quote-unquote kink at pride. Basically, they're trying to say, how could any reasonable person or corporation support Pride? It's essentially a grooming parade, right? That's the thing that they were trying to implant. And one of the things that Operation Pridefall was successful in was popularizing a few of these Kink at Pride photos, many of which were then subsequently used last year during Kink at Pride discourse, and used this year as well, mostly by some like anti-sex people on the left, and some of these young genderqueers. And the same photos are used in grooming stuff and in Pridefall stuff and Kink at Pride stuff, because it's the same base psychology at play, right? The idea that sexuality in a queer sense is dangerous and way more deviant than sexuality in a heterosexual context, right? Like straight people kissing is rated G, gay people kissing is rated PG or PG-13. It's that idea, but accelerated. Another correlation between the openly homophobic groomer talking points and like the genderqueer stuff is this idea that I'm only comfortable seeing expressions of sexuality that I can relate to or also find attractive. And another interesting thing about a lot of these photos is that a lot of these photos that they use aren't actually photos of Pride. A lot of the photos that they use are actually from the Folsom Street Fair, which is like a kink festival that takes place in San Francisco every year.
And it is hard to exaggerate how horny the Folsom Street Fair is.
So it's very horny, but also obviously because gay people have sex, gay people also exist at the Folsom Street Fair. They may even wave a pride flag. Shocking. So a lot of these photos that they use in the grooming stuff and in the Kink at Pride stuff are actually from the Folsom Street Fair. They're not actually photos of pride parades. And of course anyone who's been to Pride would kind of know that, because Pride is not like the Folsom Street Fair. They are very different events. And that's another good indicator of how a lot of these people who prop up this discourse online have never been to Pride either, because they're sharing photos at the Folsom Street Fair and saying it's Pride. Obviously, lots of these Nazis on 4chan have never been to the Folsom Street Fair or Pride. But they also share these same photos because, hey, it's people who look gay doing sexual things in public. That means it's at Pride and it's a danger to children, even though a lot of them are actually at the Folsom Street Fair. So if you're a queer person and you're reposting these Folsom Street Fair pictures and claiming that they're from a Pride parade to bash like Kink at Pride stuff, reconsider that, because you're basically just doing the work that neo-Nazis wants to do. You're just doing it on your own time, right? Like you're repurposing the exact same photos that they were putting out there within this context, and just not even knowing where these pictures are from. So stop that. Consider not. If you have to like. If you're gonna go to all of this work to denounce queer people for like existing, maybe you should consider why you're doing that. Because wow, that sucks. Because calling the Folsom Street Fair a pride parade and then demonizing it because and then demonizing Pride because there's people who act like pretty kinky is not great, because that's not what anything is happening. None of that is accurate. So. It's really frustrating to look at all of the ways these things combine, because you get genderqueers sharing Folsom Street Fair pictures, you get conservative politicians sharing them, all calling them Pride stuff. Which again, like a lot of the stuff you see there isn't even like a lot of the pictures don't even have like full nudity. So that's not necessarily like it's not even super abhorrent. But you're conflating these things in a really disingenuous way, and you're just repeating the exact same things that Nazis have been trying to get you to repeat for years, and you should consider why that happens. So, all of the grooming stuff obviously has gotten worse in the past few months. Definitely ballooned around the Don't Say Gay bill, and this got tied into a whole bunch of stuff happening in Florida with the Disney Corporation. And a lot of the grooming stuff got tied to conservatives attacking Disney now, and calling Disney a grooming organization. We've had far right candidates show up in front of Disney World to do protests. We've had Nazis show up in front of Disney World to do protests. We've seen a lot of MAGA people show up at Disney World to do protests, all against Disney's grooming of children by including anything not straight in any of their materials, which is already like so little.
Which is also like just extremely funny of like imagining you bring Walt Disney back to the bed and he's like, what is it? Come on, man. Like, guys, we're all on the same side here. Like,
yeah. And like, I don't know, like, I don't know if I really actually think that like, do all these people actually think that millions of teachers, Democrats, corporate entertainment creators are all complicit in a long-term planning of like to sexually groom minors? Some might believe that, right? That kind of overlaps with some QAnon stuff and the paranoia around like child trafficking. But I think others understand that they're kind of being hyperbolic and they're being inflammatory to get people angry and to get people like very, very like active in their hatred of gay people, right? They needs to old school homophobia kind of became a bad look. They need to find a new way to rebrand it. And now it's with this groomer stuff and like gay teachers, trans teachers, right? Gender identity stuff, right? A lot of it is now wrapped up in like trans issues. But I want to read this quote by a right-wing writer named Rod Dreher. It was cited in The Atlantic. And I think it's actually a really good look at how the people who are smart on the right, how that they are intentionally using this grooming label. Quote, about the term groomers. It's usually used to describe pedophiles who are preparing innocent kids for sexual exploitation. I think it is coming to have a somewhat broader meaning. An adult who wants to separate children from a normative sexual and gender identity to inspire confusion in them and to turn them against their parents and all the normative traditions and institutions in society. It may not be specifically to groom them for sexual activity, but it is certainly to groom them to take them on a sexual/gender identity at odds with the norm. Which really,
God,
I think that quote really showcases what's going on in their brains there.
Yeah, well, and this is something I think like Dreher, like Rob Dreher in particular, doing this I think is a really bad sign, because I mean, for people who don't know who Rob Dreher is, he's like a weirdo Catholic guy. He's been like a right wing like Catholic. I think he's a right wing Catholic sort of columnist for a long time, and like, you know, if you go back to like 2017, his big thing was this thing called the Benedict option, which was basically like, okay, so like secular societies become corrupted, like Christians should just pull out of it, right, and go live with their own communities that can be sort of like you know, if we've lost this world, we have to like create a new world in which we can live our own sort of like Christian truth or whatever. And he was in this long running kind of like battle with a sort of like, I guess like openly phalangists, kind of like openly fascists. I mean, not quite openly fascist, but like people who are reading like what's his name, people who are reading Schmidt and like the Nazi lawyers, who were like, okay, well, instead of as opposed to this thing of like, we're Catholics, we're going to pull back from the world. Their thing was we're going to use like the state to enforce Christian doctrine, and Dreher had sort of like fought that. And the fact that Dreher is now just full on in this grooming shit, right? That is really bad.
Yep.
And looking again, you know, if you want to go back into sort of our history, right? Like this is the kind of flip that happened that brought the evangelicals into the political scene, right? Like you have this flip from like people being like, well, the rapture's coming and society's impure, so we're not going to be politically engaged, to, oh, hey, look, we can use the state to just like destroy our political enemies and create the kingdom of heaven on earth. And yeah, this is not good. This is.
Yeah, but I think specifically that quote's a really good insight to how the smart conservatives who like know what they're doing, like they know it's not actual grooming, but if they can use that word within the context of being like, it's about getting kids to adopt a non-normative sexual identity. it's like non-normative, right? It's confusion in them, turning them against the institutions in society, right? All of these things that is mirrored across lots of the groomer discourse, the kink at pride discourse, all this kind of stuff. It's the same thing. It's like a non-normative sexuality is more sexual than a normative sexuality. It's this whole idea. Man, and it's not great because it's not going to stop with kids either. It's not going to. I've talked about this a lot. How once they ban trans healthcare for minors, they're going to bump it up to age 25. Then they're going to bump it up to no one has it at all.
Yep.
And I got an update on that front. First of all, for recent legislation, there's the Alabama felony healthcare ban for trans youth, which forcibly detransitions teens across the state. That just got enacted. And in Missouri, there's a similar bill in the works, officially titled the Save Adolescents from Experimentation Act. And it applies to individuals younger than 18 years old. And it would inhibit Missouri physicians and healthcare providers and prevent them from providing gender-affirming healthcare to patients. And it turns out Missouri lawmakers a few weeks ago were debating the bill seeking to restrict access to gender-affirming care for minors, and they also suggested that access to medical interventions like hormones be withheld from transgender and non-binary individuals until at least their 25th birthday. Yep. During public hearing a few weeks ago in Missouri for House Bill 2649, Lori Haynes, a psychologist, testified that she believes young adults under the age of 25 are unable to fully comprehend the dramatic and drastic and irreparable changes their body will go under if they receive gender-affirming medical treatments like puberty blockers or hormone therapies. Hayes also said that she supported getting conversion therapy for trans kids.
Yeah, I'll bet she thinks that 18-year-olds should be able to buy AR-15s, though.
Join the military.
Join the military.
Become a cop.
Become cops.
So it's already happening. We already have lawmakers and we have psychologists being brought in to testify that this is the case. They want this is going to be the next thing. They want this to happen. Now, I'm just going to say, obviously, a recent study published in the Journal of the Journal of the American Medical Association found that receiving gender-affirming care, including puberty blockers and hormones between the ages of 13 and 20, was associated with 60% lower odds of moderate or severe depression and 73% lower odds of suicidality. Another study published late last year by the Trevor Project found that among transgender and non-binary minors, hormone therapy was associated with nearly 40% lower odds of recent depression or a suicide attempt over the last year. And a lot of the effects of puberty blockers and even hormonal replacement therapy actually are reversible and are not damaging. So, I mean, but we all know that. There's that horrible Matt Walsh trans documentary coming out soon.
Oh, God. Yeah.
And he definitely, I know in the trailer, he says that one of the drugs used to give puberty blockers to minors is also used as a chemical castration for sexual assault perpetrators, which is kind of true, but it's castration in the sense that you need to take the drug always for it to work. It's a hormone blocker. It stops testosterone from being produced. If you go off of it, it's going to happen again. It's not a permanent castration. It's going to suppress testosterone.
You know what? A popular medication for people with heart problems is also a highly explosive compound. Oh no!
Yeah,
it turns out things can be used in different ways.
Yeah, like 100% of cancer victims are found with dihydrogen monoxide in their system.
But yeah. Anyway, we're gonna see a lot of lies about HRT coming up soon because this Matt Walsh documentary is gonna be stupid. But again, he doesn't understand the science. Obviously, he's a propagandist. But the last thing I want to talk about here is what's going to be happening in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. So taking their cue from I'm going to quote an article here by Daily Kos. They did a really good write up. David Newert wrote it.
David Newert, for the record, like the thing that he has been this beat that we're in, like writing about these people. David's been doing it for like 30 years.
He's amazing.
He's incredible.
Yeah. So I'm gonna quote from him here. This is the last thing we'll close with. Taking a cue from the incoming tide of far-right fear-mongering about grooming and an LGBTQ agenda in schools and libraries, a group of Idaho biker militiamen are planning to show up to confront people celebrating Pride at an event in downtown Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, in a public park next month. Two men from the leadership of Panhandle Patriots, a militia-oriented bikers club based in northern Idaho, Justin Allen, the group's vice president, and Jeff White, its sergeant at arms, told a recent gathering at a church hosted by Republican State House member Heather Scott that they plan to have a gun-driven event next month in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, the same day as the city's Pride celebration at a park less than a mile away, and they planned a confrontation. I'm going to play a clip of them announcing this. And yeah, give it a listen.
These parades are government funded. Many of you aren't aware right now, in Coeur d'Alene, on the 10th of June, there is Family Day. And in Family Day, they are promoting family values, activities, and everything. The very following day, they are having Gay Pride Day. In the very same park, the very next day, where they will be allowed to parade through all of Coeur d'Alene, drag queen dancers, education hour, making all this material available for all the kids in a park that is designed for kids. We are having an event the very same day. That very same day, we actually intend to go head to head with these people. A line must be drawn in the sand. Good people need to stand up. As she was talking about the repercussions, we say, damn the repercussions. Stand up, take it to the head, go to the fight. If you can, possibly, we know a lot of you are in Bonner. We live in Bonner County. We are fighting in multiple counties. We are asking for all of you to come stand with us. Our event is advertised as Gun to Lane because it's an anniversary of when we stood to protect our community. We're standing again to protect our community. We shifted our date to be available to go head to head with these people. They are trying to take your children. This fight is not just paper. It's not just words. It's not just politicians. They have to see people standing in their face saying no more.
So wow, that sucked, and is entirely expected. So the meeting at this church, read by a Republican House member, was titled "The Game Plan to Remove Inappropriate Materials in Our Schools and Libraries." It was held at a Calvary Chapel in a small town north of Sandpoint, Idaho. Scott has a long history of associations and identifications with the far-right patriot movement, specifically in Idaho, and it was bad. Heather Scott, the Republican State House member, about an hour into the night, Scott invited the two militia dudes up to the podium to speak, and they said that. So, yeah, it's in a flyer posted by the Panhandle Patriots advertising their planned confrontation at Pride, at a flyer that they made shows a drag queen reading at a public library and urges people to join in and standing up against the indoctrination and grooming of our children. And if you don't protect children, you are part of the problem. So yeah, they're planning to take a whole bunch of guns the same day as a Pride parade, and we'll see what happens.
I love that we're just gonna see what happens. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I very incredibly deeply hope we're not reporting on the result of that, because...
Yep.
Yeah.
So anyway, before you share Kink at Pride discourse, think this is what happens. This is what happens when you engage in this type of rhetoric, that queer sexuality is inherently more dangerous to kids. Because, anyway...
I'm sad now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this isn't really an upper of an episode.
You don't say.
but it is important to talk about. Yes. So if you're going to Pride this year, please be careful, because there's a lot of worsening attacks on queer people. Bring a knife back. Mm-hmm. You shouldn't have to. You shouldn't have to do this, but this is the world we live in.
Bring an IFAC. Mm-hmm.
Anyway, well, that does it for us today. It could happen here. Hopefully it doesn't happen here, but it could.
China's Ministry of State Security is one of the most mysterious and powerful spy agencies in the world. But in 2017, the FBI got inside.
This is Special Agent Regal, Special Agent Bradley Hall.
This MSS officer has no idea the U.S. government is onto him. But the FBI has his chats, texts, emails, even his personal diary. Hear how they got it on the 6th Bureau podcast.
I now have several terabytes of an MSS officer, no doubt, no question, of his life. And that's a unicorn.
No one had ever seen anything like that. It was unbelievable.
This is a story of the inner workings of the MSS and how one man's ambition and mistakes opened its vault of secrets.
Listen to the 6th Bureau on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hi, this is Joe Winterstein, host of the Spirit Daughter podcast, where we talk about astrology, natal charts, and how to step into your most vibrant life. And I just sat down with a Minnie Driver.
The Irish traveler said when I was 16, you're going to have a terrible time with men.
Actor, storyteller, and unapologetic Aquarian visionary. Aquarius is all about freedom loving and different perspectives. And I find a lot of people with strong placements in Aquarius are misunderstood. A Sun and Venus in Aquarius in her 7th house spark her unconventional approach to partnership.
He really has taught me to embrace people sleeping in different rooms, on different houses, in different places, but just an embracing of the isness of it all.
If you're navigating your own transformation or just want a chart side view into how a leading artist integrates astrology, creativity, and real life, this episode is a must listen. Listen to the Spirit Daughter podcast starting on February 24th on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
In 2023, a story gripped the UK, evoking horror and disbelief.
The nurse who should have been in charge of caring for tiny babies is now the most prolific child killer in modern British history.
Everyone thought they knew how it ended. A verdict, a villain, a nurse named Lucy Letby.
Lucy Letby has been found guilty.
But what if we didn't get the whole story?
The moment you look at the whole picture, the case collapses.
I'm Amanda Knox, and in the new podcast, Doubt, the Case of Lucy Letby, we follow the evidence and hear from the people that lived it to ask what really happened when the world decided who Lucy Letby was.
No voicing of any skepticism or doubt.
It'll cause so much harm at every single level of the British establishment of this is wrong.
Listen to Doubt, the Case of Lucy Letby on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Clayton Eckerd, and in 2022, I was the lead of ABC's The Bachelor.
Unfortunately, it didn't go according to plan. He became the first bachelor to ever have his final rose rejected. The internet turned on him.
If I could press a button and rewind it all, I would.
But what happened to Clayton after the show made even bigger headlines. It began as a one-night stand and ended in a courtroom, with Clayton at the center of a very strange paternity scandal.
The media is here. This case has gone viral.
The dating contract.
Agree to date me, but I'm also suing you.
Please search warrant. This is unlike anything I've ever seen before.
I'm Stephanie Young. This is Love Trapped. This season, an epic battle of he said, she said, and the search for accountability in a sea of lies.
I have done nothing except get pregnant by the Bachelor!
Listen to Love Trapped on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome to Make It Happen Here, a podcast about something that did happen that sucked enormously. I'm Christopher Wong. I'm the host. Also with me is Garrison and Sophie. Hello.
Good
morning.
Just really starting off positive there.
It's look. it's this episode and the next episode. I mean, I guess this episode kind of ends on a high note, but
That's great to hear.
I'm so happy.
I totally believe you.
It kind of does.
All right.
Yeah, Shireen is also here. Hello.
Hi, sorry, my fault. Keep going.
No worries. So this is the 33rd anniversary of the Tiananmen Square massacre. Tomorrow's episode, I think, will actually be going out on, I guess, the day that it started. Kind of, it starts like the night of like June 3rd. And okay, I'm curious what you two's like. I don't know, like received like cultural memory of Tiananmen is, because I don't know. I think I got a kind of weird one, like being from a Chinese family, but
as a white Canadian, I have zero amount of my knowledge about the Tiananmen Square massacre, nor really about Tiananmen. It just, that is something I never have really learned about.
Yeah, I know that it happened in 1989. That's the American lesson we got on the history of that massacre, is that it happened in 1989. Really mediocre.
Yeah, it's okay. Well, today and tomorrow we're gonna go. Well, we're gonna talk, I think, less about what happened there specifically and more about the sort of broader history that's in. But I guess let's start out. So, sometimes there's really three Tiananmens. There's the student protest that's inside Tiananmen Square itself. There's this part of Beijing, like around the squares, like a bunch of blocks that are taken over by workers, and then there's a bunch of protests in other cities. And unfortunately, we're not going to be talking about the protests in the other cities because, like, basically nothing is known about them, other than that, like, they happened, but the people who would know aren't talking. So, for somewhat obvious reasons. Yeah, and the students themselves, I think, like the normal version of Tiananmen is like there's these students and they're like pro-democracy protesters, right? But they're way weirder than that. There's like this weird ideological grab bag thing going on. They're basically, what they're pissed off about is that this thing that's called the reform and opening like isn't going fast enough, and we should talk about what that sort of is. So reform and opening is like, it's this period in China in sort of the 80s and some extent the 90s. And on the one hand, you have these sort of steps to like ease restrictions on speech and like rehabilitate intellectuals and like allow for a broader public discourse. But the other half of it is that like they're bringing markets back to China, right? And this is a shit show in a lot of ways. If you want to hear about like the CCP reinventing debt peonage in about 5 years, go listen to my Bastards episode on the poison milk scandal. It's a trip. But on the other hand, you have, so you have kind of like opening up, right? You have just more discourse. They're not persecuting intellectuals again, sort of. They're de-persecuting the intellectuals that they had persecuted. But on the other hand, you get this absolutely draconian sort of like set of crackdowns in the social sphere. You have the one-child policy. You have this like really powerful tightening of one-man rule in the factory, and you have the sort of the destruction of these forms. We'll get into this more later, but like the sort of limited decision-making capacity that workers had in the factories, just is sort of dismantled. And so you see these sort of gaps beginning to form here, right? Like, on the one hand, you have these students who want market reforms to go faster. They want more freedom of speech. They like kind of want democracy, but like mostly what they want is to be in charge of the party so they can crush the sort of like bureaucracy they see as holding market reforms back. And it's worth noting that like a lot of these students are involved in what becomes known as neo-authoritarianism, which is this sort of ideology that holds that like the strong central party should take full control of society and destroy the factions and the bureaucracy. And so, and that's how you can lead development. And this stuff, like neo-authoritarianism survives the protests and goes on to become like a pretty major faction in the CCP itself in the 90s and 2000s. And, this is where things just get weird, right? The student movement itself is very hierarchical, and it gets to the point where like, by the end of the student movement, they're the student leaders are like kidnapping each other over like who has control of the microphones and like the stages in the square. It is extremely bizarre. And you know, in terms of like the protests actually like what the protests are trying to do is they're trying to like influence this factional fight inside the CCP over like the speed at which reforms are going to go. And this, like, it doesn't work. It's like stunningly ineffectual. The guy they're trying to defend like winds up getting ousted and put under house arrest for the rest of his life. So okay, so those are the student protesters, but the part, and that the student protesters are the part of this that like everyone knows, partly because some of those people escaped to Hong Kong, and you know they're very influential in sort of shaping the memory there. But there's also the workers that I mentioned earlier, and the students basically like hate the workers. For most of the time this protest is going on, and this is months, right? They literally will not let any of the workers go into into Tiananmen Square. Like they have this whole system, and like in order to get into like increasing like closer to the center of the square, you have to be a student, and then to get to the center of the square, you have to be like a member of the leadership. It's very weird. And you know, and like one of the things the workers are trying to do is they want to carry out a general strike, and the students are like, no, absolutely not. Do not do a general strike, because largely is because okay, so if these people start doing a general strike, like that's not something that's not under our control. And you know, okay, so this raises the question, like, if the relationships between the students who are at Tiananmen and the workers who are at Tiananmen are this bad, like, why are the workers even there? And there's a few answers to this question. The sort of the simplest and most immediate one is that, like, the workers are initially they come out because they're pissed. They see how badly like the cops and sort of like the party is treating the students in the square, and so they get mad. But there's other stuff going on too. The late 80s is. The late 80s in China is sort of a mess economically. There's rampant inflation, and the sort of rapid increase in prices is a threat to, you know, the sort of like cheap supply of grain, which is like the sort of main subsidy that if you're an urban worker that you get. And meanwhile, you know, you have marketization happening. So at the same time that the prices are increasing for everyone and they can't get access to stuff that they need, you have just like CCP princelings like racing down the street in imported sports cars. And like these are like the only cars, right? Like people, I don't know, like people are starting to get bicycles in mass sort of in this period. But then, you know, it's like, hey, here's this like party boss guy who has a sports car. They're like spending years' salaries, like gambling at racetracks, and people just get pissed off. So they start organizing, and I'm going to read from a section of a piece by Yuhan Zhang about what they were doing. During the struggle to obstruct the military, workers started to realize the power of their spontaneous organization and action. This was self-liberation on an unprecedented level. A huge wave of self-organization ensued. The Beijing Workers' Autonomous Federation's membership grew exponentially, and other workers' organizations, both within and across workplaces, mushroomed. The development of organizations led to a radicalization of action. Workers started organizing self-armed quasi-militias, such as picket corps and dare-to-die brigades, to monitor and broadcast the military's whereabouts. These quasi-militias were also responsible for maintaining public order, so as not to provide any pretext for military intervention. In a sense, Beijing became a city self-managed by workers. It was reminiscent of Petrograd's self-armed workers organized in the Soviets in the months between Russia's February and October revolutions. At the same time, Beijing workers built many more barricades and fortifications on the street. In many factories, they organized strikes and slowdowns. A possible general strike was put on the table as well. Many workers started to build connections between factories to prepare for a general strike. And yeah, like this is the part of it that like people don't talk about because it wasn't in the square. And I mean, the other part, the other factor that's going on here is that like, so the press corps is like sitting in the square, and this is why Tiananmen is this massive spectacle, right? Because all of this, everything that's happening here inside the square is happening like in front of the entire Western press corps. And like people are like, you know, like people are just like pointing cameras at their window, right? And you know, but on the other hand, the people outside of the square, like the workers outside of the square, the workers are getting more organized, and this is absolutely unacceptable to the party. And so, yeah, on the night of June 3rd, the army just starts killing them. There'd been a couple of attempts earlier to clear the sort of fortifications, and it hadn't really worked. But this time, Like they're able to bring in military units that aren't from Beijing or like aren't from around the area, and they kill an enormous number of people. Yeah, and I think it's important to note that like both in terms of the killings that happen immediately and the political persecution like after that, it's mostly the workers bearing this, especially in the initial massacre. Most of the killing happens as the army's like fighting its way into the square. And, you know, I mean, they kill people in the square too, but, you know, and eventually they get into the square, and this is where you get like Tank Man and like the sort of the famous accounts of the massacre. But like by that point, it's basically over, right? Because one of the other things that's happened is that over the course of this protest, a lot of the students have left because they sort of gave up after the like factional conflict like stopped. But so most of the people like who are there are on the outs, are like other workers on the outside of the square trying to defend it. And when those people get killed and the army gets in the middle of the square, it's the whole thing's already over. And you know, these protests get crushed, and you know, before the last bullet has been fired, everyone left standing is trying to create their own narratives about what just happened. The most common one is that Tiananmen is this like clash between democracy and authoritarianism, and like, okay, to some extent that's not wrong. Although I mean, you know, we've already mentioned that there are a lot of neo-authoritarian students there, but like, you know, okay, this is kind of a fair interpretation of what's going on. Like, there's a lot of other pro-democracy movements in this period, like in the region. Most famously, there's Taiwan and South Korea. But the actual question of what's happening here is really a question of what kind of democracy there's, you know, that these people are fighting for. The students at Tiananmen, you know, to the extent that their democratic principles are sincere and not a cover for a sort of like deeply authoritarian version of liberalism that's, you know, demanded by like a sort of new class of intellectuals to oversee market reform. So to the extent that they actually believe in this, right? They believe in a very narrow conception of political democracy. And, you know, this democracy, this sort of political democracy, operates at the level of the state, right? It's based on free citizens who are equal before the law, participating in elections to choose representatives who like pass laws and, you know, oversee and manage the state bureaucracy. But, you know, this model of political democracy, which is, you know, this is the one that we live under, right? It relegates the workplace to a separate economic sphere into which democracy doesn't extend. The capitalist firm, or its state-owned equivalent, remains the absolute dictatorship of capitalists and their managerial flunkies. And even the sort of progressive wings of the pro-democracy movement in like Taiwan and South Korea, like maintain this private dictatorship. You know, if you're a worker in one of these states, right, you get rights. You get the ability to form unions, you get access to the welfare state, you get these sort of limited protections from the worst like physical and psychological abuses that your bosses can inflict. But no matter how progressive the pro-democracy movements actually are, the legitimacy of the dictatorship of the bosses was not up for dispute. And, you know, to these sort of pro-democracy movements, right? Democracy means a democratic state and not a democratic workplace. And this is the huge divide between what's happening at Tiananmen and what's happening like everywhere else in the world. The workers at Tiananmen are the only people left in this entire sort of like run of pro-democracy movements that disagree. They are standing against not only they're standing not only against their own government, against a lot of the students who are also like at these protests. They are standing against literally the entire tide of history itself by applying the principles of the pro-democracy movement to like their own concerns, right? Which is skyrocketing inflation, mounting debts, like rampant corruption to government officials, like spiraling inequality and petty bureaucratic oppression. Beijing's working class had reinvented a old and now like largely forgotten tradition of democracy in the factory that I'm calling it democratic worker self-management because there's no good name for it and they're all kind of clunky.
Fair. I mean, this is based on who these people were at the time. It makes sense that all of their names for things were pretty clunky.
Yeah, well, the thing is they don't name like this, and this is one of the things about. Okay, one of the real problems with studying Tiananmen, right, is that like okay, so we have really good accounts from the students, right? Because some of the students flee and they're able to make it out. We have like jack shit basically from the workers. We have what we do have is we have some of the documents they produced, and we have a lot of interviews that were done with people there, and they, I don't know, they have very, very idiosyncratic ways of expressing what they believe. And so, you'll get things where like, okay, they're like, okay, wait, we believe in the rule of law, right? And then the next sentence will be like, we have calculated the exact amount of surplus value that has been extracted from us according to Marx. And it's like, what? Because the thing that they're doing is like they're synchronizing this news. They're synchronizing sort of like a political tendency that's trying to address the sort of dual dictatorships they're dealing with, right? Like because they're dealing at the same time with like this political dictatorship the party has, and also the fact that their bosses now like completely control everything that they do. And because of this, they wind up being like the last, or I guess technically second to last, because Argentina happens, so that's sort of convoluted mess in itself. But they're in the 20th century, like they are the last people who are fighting for democracy in the factory. And this, like, to a large extent, is what Tiananmen is actually about. It's the culmination of a century and a half long war between the democratic wing of the classical workers movement and like every single other ideology that exists. And these guys, over that century and a half long span, they're going to fight communists, they're going to fight capitalists, they're going to fight liberals and fascists and monarchies and republics and social democracies and theocracies. And at Tiananmen, they're going to lose one more time. And that defeat, the fact that they lose here, the fact that these people get slaughtered, the fact that like they're crushed so effectively that no one even remembers they exist, or like much less like what they were fighting for. This defeat is the origin of the modern world. The one-man rule in the factory, like the individual single boss who has total control and power over you, is in its sort of thousand forms, is the author of the hell that is the 21st century. And when we come back from this commercial break, we are going to look at the international part of the struggle that Tiananmen is sort of like the conclusion of.
So here's some ads, maybe from Amazon.
Here are
get a job working at their distribution center. That seems like a good paying gig.
And we're back to look at why you too also must live in the absolute one-man dictatorship in the factory. So
well, it's not as much one man. It's the one algorithm. You have to listen to what your iPad tells you when you're walking through the Amazon distribution center.
That's true. Yeah, they have. It is funny because it's like they've somehow made a worse version of it. It was like, okay,
they sure have.
Yeah, it's like it's like okay, now you are ruled by a computer whose job it is to make one person an extremely large amount of money.
It's even further like depersonalized and further disjointed from actually being a human.
Yeah, it's I don't know. There's some metaphor here which, if I wasn't like sick out of my mind about how like power depersonalizes and dehumanizes you until the point where you're replaced with a machine that you can make here, but I don't know. One in every 2 days, the room will randomly start spitting on me. So
yeah,
I can't do that.
The lesson here is that when you're thinking about factories and how bosses suck and how it's not great to work in a factory, just have a boss that tells you what to do. The lesson is that it can always get worse because it could always be a computer.
Yeah.
Anyway, continue.
So, okay, to get a sense of like what this fight is and like how we got to Tiananmen, we need to go back to the revolutions of 1848, which is at first glance not an incredibly obvious place to start. Okay, if you want like a really detailed like blow for blow account of the revolutions of 1848, go listen to the Revolutions podcast. It's good. I am not gonna do it here because oh my god, there's so much stuff. But the very short version is that so. In 1848 across Europe, there's a bunch of revolutions that are collectively known, well, sometimes known as like the springtime of the peoples. And this is the first this is the first wave of revolutions where socialists are like a real thing. like Frederick Engels, like that Engels, like the Marx and Engels is like on a barricade with a rifle fighting in Prussia. There's like, yeah, I'm not gonna. Sadly, I can't get into August von Willich here, but like, go Google August von Willich. He's wild. There's a huge revolution in France where they finally deposed the king, and you know, there's this question here. As these revolutions look like they're winning, there's this question of how far democracy is going to go and what it's going to mean. And yeah, you have a large thing. You have and this is in a lot of ways very similar to what you're dealing with in China in 1989. Inside of France, you have the split, right? You have the split between, you know, like the people who are like French radicals, but in the sense of like the original French Revolution, who are, you know, okay, they want. Like they want an elected democracy. They absolutely do not want to like deal with the fact that the workplace is not a democracy. And then, you know, and you have a bunch of socialists, and the socialists are like, hey, can we do something about like property relations and like the fact that there's a bunch of poor people with no jobs? And, you know, and the socialists get slaughtered, but, you know, they don't die. I mean, okay.
You just said they get slaughtered.
Well, okay, so a lot of these people get horribly slaughtered, but a lot of them escape and like make it out.
The ideology lives on.
Yeah, well, the ideology lives on, and
okay.
so a lot of the well, I mean, there's an interesting story here. Like a lot of the leaders like live on. A lot of these people, like for example, so a bunch of people flee to the U.S. and they wind up being like a lot of the officer corps of the Union Army in the Civil War is made up by these socialists who like had to flee after the revolutions failed. And like Prussia and stuff. But yeah, so...
But many of them do, in fact, die.
Yeah. It doesn't go great for them. And you know, and you get to see one of the other things that's going to happen a lot, which is that, okay, so like the sort of like the French, like the French radicals who are like pro-capitalism, but also pro-democracy, like ally with the conservative factions, and then they also all get killed when Napoleon III takes power. But
man,
you know,
it's really hard to root for someone here in that.
Yeah,
context.
I know. It's like this is really like the revolution produces its own gravediggers shit. Like, oh hey, what did you expect was going to happen when you allied with like the landlords and Napoleon III?
Good thing this mistake will never be made again.
Nope. Good thing we're not about to talk
democracy.
about this. Yeah. Pay no mind to the rest of this episode.
Yeah. Anyway, continue.
So yeah, you have the split between people who want electoral democracy, but you know, dictatorships in the workplace, and these people who want like democracy in the workplace. And this also prefigures a split inside of socialism itself. For the, and this isn't even, I like in my script, I say like for the most radical factions of socialism, you know, like control over the means of production, which is like the thing that you want, means that like production is controlled either by like free associations of workers, like, you know, direct democratic unions, this is later called syndicalism, or like workers' councils. And that's, you know, I say it's the most radical faction, but like that's a very popular conception of like what this is going to be. Like if you read Marx, like, Marx is like, oh yeah, free associations of workers, sure. But, you know, as the sort of like 1840s roll into the 1860s and the 1870s, there's this faction of the movement that becomes just like obsessed with the bureaucratic technologies of the state. And, you know, like they watch the state really get involved in the economy in a way that it like kind of hasn't before. Then they over the course of sort of industrialization, they watch with like incredible envy as they see like these incredibly elaborate like planning schemes. They see the state building roads and canals and railroads, and then entire cities with like these like complex electrical grids and like gas lines and plumbing systems, and especially trains, like specifically trains. This drives them all completely insane, and they begin to believe that like a single centralized planning body, like not a democratic association of workers, like a single centralized state planning body can like, you know, bring about the long sought after like cooperative commonwealth of socialism. And all these people get obsessed with like central planning, right? And this starts to sort of like consume more and more of the left. In Germany, which is home to like the powerful German Social Democratic Party, which is like probably the most powerful socialist party in the world at this point, the socialists become divided into two camps. There's the revisionists led by Edward Bernstein, who like he like renounces Marxism and revolution and like entirely in favor of reforming capitalism in the state from like within. And then, you know, you have these orthodox Marxists that are like led by Karl Kautsky, whose whole thing is that he hates Bernstein. And like the only thing that these two groups agree on is that the only thing they agree on is that bureaucratic state planning is the thing you're supposed to be fighting for and not like democratic workplaces. And this leads the SDP to like they do a lot of things that are like disastrous. One of the things that they wind up doing a lot is like actively working with the bosses to like destroy the like workplace autonomy for their own unions. So like there'll be things where it's like I don't know, there's a famous example of like there's I think they're a metalworkers union. I think they make knives or something, and they have a lot of control over the production process, right? They can control like how much stuff gets produced, the process, like how it works, like what they're actually doing. And the SDP is like, no, this is bad because this is inefficient, and so they like basically crush their own union. And this goes in really disastrous directions. But we're still the single person who becomes like the most obsessed with like the potential of bureaucratic state planning is one very, very, very obscure guy named Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, who I don't expect anyone to have heard of.
Friend of the pod, Vladimir Ilyich Lenin.
Friend of the pod.
I just said Leninich. Oh, that's funny. Keep that in.
Yeah. So as David Graeber points out, Lenin's obsession with like the German postal service is such that like, okay, so he writes a very famous book about like what a future socialist state is going to be called State and Revolution, and like almost all of it is a lie. But he also says this in it. A witty German social democrat of the 1870s called the postal service an example of the socialist economic system. This is very true. At present, the postal service is a business organized along the lines of a state capitalist monopoly, blah blah. Imperialism. This is this whole thing, but like imperialism is making everything also this. To organize the whole national economy on the lines of the postal service so that the technicians, foremen, bookkeepers, as well as all officials shall receive no salaries higher than a workman's wage, all under the control and leadership of the armed proletariat. This is our immediate aim. And if you think about what this means for about 5 seconds, right? What he's saying is that socialism is the entire economy being planned by a bureaucratic state. And you know, this sets off this like massive series of confrontations with the part of the workers' movement who, you know, like want to control the work that they do. And, you know, the people who think that like the revolution means that they're actually going to be able to make decisions over their work and not, you know, just like work for like a slightly different set of bureaucrats. And this struggle between, you know, this sort of like new socialist bureaucrats and like democracy in the workers' movement is, you know, it's an enormous part of the struggle that happens here. And there's like another version of it happening between the workers' movement itself and the capitalist state. Like in the 1880s, the workers' movements in Italy and in Germany and like France to a lesser extent, they have these, they form these parties that are called like states within a state. And, you know, these things are these massive networks of these workers' institutions. They have like free schools, they have workers' associations, they have like friendly societies, they have libraries, they have theaters, they have like unions, they have co-ops, they have like neighborhood associations, they have tenant unions, they have mutual aid societies. And, you know, and these things are all run democratically by the workers who form the associations. And, you know, and like the people who are doing this are like, you know, the hope is that like this is going to be the basis for the new socialist society, right? It's like, okay, we can just come together and like do this stuff. And we can do it democratically, and we can administer this stuff ourselves. And these things are enormously popular. And you know, and this like terrifies this sort of old ruling class. And Otto von Bismarck, who's the guy basically running the German state in this period, like his solution to this is to create like bureaucratic state-run versions of like all of these things. So he creates like state-run libraries, state-run theaters, like state-run welfare services, and he's using these as like a replacement to the sort of workers' institutions. And he has this great line where he tells an American Observer, quote, "My idea was to bribe the working classes, or shall I say, to win them over, to regard the state as a social institution existing for their own sake and invested in and interested in their welfare." And like this works. This is an enormous success. This is one of the greatest propaganda coups ever, because like it's so successful in convincing people that the thing that they're fighting for is like the state bureaucratic version of this thing and not the version where they do it themselves, that like when the socialists like take power, they confuse Bismarck's like literally the welfare state bribe thing that he like made to buy off the movements. Like they confuse that with socialism itself. And like to this day, everyone believes this. It's like, it's I don't know. I lose my mind constantly over this because all of these things that Bismarck developed, like specifically to destroy the socialist movement, everyone was like, oh my God, this is socialism. It's like, no, please stop. And, you know, and this is really effective, particularly on the leadership of the movement. But like the actual like people in these parties, like in these movements, don't forget it. And as the sort of like 20th century draws to a close, and you get like as the 19th century draws to a close, and you get like the 20th century, the workers who are like doing the uprisings are not sort of like the, you know, the workers who are doing the uprisings haven't like drinking the Kool-Aid. And the thing that they do immediately when they start doing uprisings is they start building these democratic institutions, particularly workers' councils. The most famous of these are like other workers' councils that form sort of spontaneously in the Russian revolutions of 1905 and 1917. These are like, this is what like they're called Soviets because Soviets is just like the word for council in Russian. And these things are originally these like ad hoc strike committees, and then they eventually become these like formalized elected bodies of representatives from like the various factories who are like coordinating a strike. And okay, so in 1905 they lose and they all die. But in 1917, they do this again and they form the Soviets again, and this time the councils start to take like a larger role in coordinating production directly, and you know, coordinating between different like factories and industries, and they turn into this sort of like counterpower thing to the new government. And this kicks off this open period of warfare that stretches like literally from Italy to Argentina between the different socialist factions who like like the different factions of this movement who want democracy in the factory, and this like a lot newly formed like anti-democratic alliance of like social democrats, Bolsheviks, and capitalists who like, you know, are like, okay, well, some of them are in favor of like, you can have democracy. Well, okay, there's a whole range of this thing, right? Like the thing that unites all of these movements, it's the social democrats, the Bolsheviks, the capitalists, and later the fascists, is that they like emphatically like do not want democracy in the factory, and they're willing to put aside their differences to make sure it doesn't happen. But you know, there's still a huge fight that happens here between 1917 and 1920. You get workers' councils in Germany, Poland, Austria, Ukraine, Ireland. And Ireland, there's these like two giant revolts by syndicalist workers' unions in Brazil and Argentina, and these all get crushed. In Italy has like one of the most intense conflicts between these like a lot of syndicalists and the Italian state. And they have this really famous like set of factory occupations where instead of like, so like before this, people would go on strike, right? You go on strike and you leave your factory. And in Italy, they were like, okay, wait, what if we just stayed in the factory and took it over so that they couldn't like just like restart production with scabs, and we now control the factory? And there's this huge wave of it in Italy in the late 19 like teens and early 1920s. And you know, it looks like for a bit, it really looks like they're going to bring down the government. But the factory occupations get crushed, but they don't get crushed by the government. They get crushed by the Italian Socialist Party and like their union, the General Confederation of Labor. And like this is how fascism wins in Italy. Like to a large extent, it's that like when like, you know, and this happens in Germany too. It's like when sort of the Social Democrats and the capitalists are faced with this possibility that like workers could take over the factories, the Social Democrats turn on them and just kill them all. And the problem with that is that like, okay, well, who do you do the killing with? And the answer is the fascists. And then the Social Democrats like themselves all get exterminated by the fascists. It's this like, you know, it is a terrible cycle that we're going to see like literally over and over and over again. Yeah, it's bad.
That sounds not great. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you know who else will slaughter your factory council?
Oh no.
Oh, I actually know this one.
Mm.
All right, Garrison, go.
We have a few options here. There is our good friends at the Washington State Patrol. If you're trying to set up a highway business next to the highway and run it via workers' council, the State Patrol come up, be like, not on this highway, and you're done. Probably also like Amazon or something. Who knows?
Yeah. And we're back to see, okay. We are back to see like the worst defeats that they're going to have, that like the people who want like a factory council are going to have in this period, which for once actually has nothing to do with Amazon or the capitalists whatsoever. Which is that like the worst balling they're going to get is from Lenin and the Bolsheviks, who I don't know how many people sort of like know the history of the Russian Revolution, but like the factory councils are the people who like basically put the Bolsheviks in power in the first place. Like to a large extent, like they're the people who like were the shock troops of this. And like literally the moment Lenin takes power, he starts undermining the Soviets. He publishes this thing like 3 or 4 days after the October Revolution. He publishes this thing called the Draft Decree on Workers' Control, which is like, he basically is like he's trying to like shift power from these councils to the Bolshevik Party in the state. And this doesn't really work initially because these groups are like pretty powerful, but publicly Lenin's like, no, we derive our power from the Soviets. Like we're the people who support these councils. But then like he's like chipping away from them. And then in 1918, he writes this paragraph from The Immediate Task of the Soviet Government, which is like one of the wildest things I've ever read in my life.
Which is saying a lot.
It's wild. It is. Jeez. Okay. Unquestioning submission to a single will is absolutely necessary for the success of labor processes that are based on large-scale machine industry. Today, the revolution demands, in the interest of socialism, that the masses unquestioningly obey the single will of the leaders of the labor process. Which is like, what? Like, what?
How about you explain to our good viewers why that is so bonkers?
Like, okay,
because some of them might just hear that and be like, "Oh, leftist words, cool." Moving on.
Even just the first two words, unquestioning submission, makes me
like that part. Like unquestioning submission, the whole thing about like the masses must unquestionably obey the will of the single leader. Like what?
No, hard pass.
This is like what is happening? This is, and the thing that's happening here is that Lenin is being really candid about what it means for there to be a boss. Like, and what it means for there to be someone whose position is above you that can order you to do literally whatever they want, and if you don't obey them, like, bad things happen and you starve or get shot. Yeah, he's incredibly candid about this, right? Like, this is what, like, having a boss means. It means unquestioning submission to the single will of a leader.
This is how I talk about Sophie all the time.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Wow. Shaking her head. I'm with you, Sophie. Can't believe.
Thanks, Gare.
They just said that.
You're welcome. Whatever you say, Sophie.
Thanks, Gare.
God, I'm thinking about this. There's this line. It's sort of tangentially related to the story. I read this thing once about the workers who took over the Sorbonne. Actually, I think was it the students who of a bunch of students like take over this the big academy in Paris in 1968, and they send this like I think it's a telegram to like the Chinese embassy, and like the end of it is if I'm remembering the exact words correctly, it's the revolution will not be complete until the revolution will not be complete until the last capitalist is hung with the entrails of the last bureaucrat.
That's incredibly hot.
Yeah. 68 was wild. That's the thing this brought to mind for some reason. But, I mean, going back to sort of Lenin and his like unquestioning like submission to the single will, like he's more candid about what like one man rule in the factory or like having a boss you have to obey like means. But the system he's describing like isn't different than any other political system. Like Bolshevik rule in the factory like isn't really different than capitalist, social democratic, or fascist rule. And the movement for democracy in the factory, as these people are crushed, especially in Kronstadt in 1921, like the movement for democracy in the factory is faced by 4 implacable enemies who are willing to put aside all of their ideological differences to ensure that like no one ever like gets to control their workplace. And and as the 20s bled into the early 1930s, like the movement seemed to have disappeared, but They didn't. They absolutely didn't. Even though they got murdered by the fascists, the communists, the Social Democrats, and the capitalists, they're going to be back next episode to do like 12 more revolutions. And yeah, that's come back tomorrow for us talking about like why these revolutions happened, what the ruling class did to stop them, and then the lead up to Tiananmen Square to see the sort of like the final stand of the Chinese working class, and get to what Tiananmen actually was.
What a cliffhanger. Wow. Woo!
In 2023, a story gripped the UK, evoking horror and disbelief.
The nurse who should have been in charge of caring for tiny babies is now the most prolific child killer in modern British history.
Everyone thought they knew how it ended. A verdict, a villain, a nurse named Lucy Letby.
Lucy Letby has been found guilty.
But what if we didn't get the whole story?
The moment you look at the whole picture, the case collapses.
I'm Amanda Knox, and in the new podcast, Doubt, the Case of Lucy Letby, we follow the evidence and hear from the people that lived it to ask what really happened when the world decided who Lucy Letby was.
No voicing of any skepticism or doubt.
It'll cause so much harm at every single level of the British establishment of this is wrong.
Listen to Doubt, the Case of Lucy Letby on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hi, this is Jill Winterstein, host of the Spirit Daughter podcast, where we talk about astrology, natal charts, and how to step into your most vibrant life. And I just sat down with a Minnie Driver.
The Irish traveller said when I was 16, you're going to have a terrible time with men.
Actor, storyteller, and unapologetic Aquarian visionary. Aquarius is all about freedom-loving and different perspectives, and I find a lot of people with strong placements in Aquarius are misunderstood. A Sun and Venus in Aquarius in her 7th house spark her unconventional approach to partnership.
He really has taught me to embrace people sleeping in different rooms, on different houses, in different places, but just an embracing of the isness of it all.
If you're navigating your own transformation or just want a chart-side view into how a leading artist integrates astrology, creativity, and real life, this episode is a must listen. Listen to the Spirit Daughter podcast starting on February 24th on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
China's Ministry of State Security is one of the most mysterious and powerful spy agencies in the world. But in 2017, the FBI got inside.
This is Special Agent Regal. Special Agent Bradley Hall.
This MSS officer has no idea the U.S. government is onto him. But the FBI has his chats, texts, emails, even his personal diary. Hear how they got it on the 6th Bureau podcast.
I now have several terabytes of an MSS officer, no doubt, no question, of his life. And that's a unicorn.
No one had ever seen anything like that. It was unbelievable.
This is a story of the inner workings of the MSS and how one man's ambition and mistakes opened its vault of secrets.
Listen to the 6th Bureau on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Clayton Eckerd, and in 2022, I was the lead of ABC's The Bachelor.
Unfortunately, it didn't go according to plan. He became the first Bachelor to ever have his final rose rejected. The internet turned on him.
If I could press a button and rewind it all, I would.
But what happened to Clayton after the show made even bigger headlines. It began as a one-night stand and ended in a courtroom, with Clayton at the center of a very strange paternity scandal.
The media is here. This case has gone viral.
The dating contract.
Agree to date me, but I'm also suing you.
Please search warrant.
This is unlike anything I've ever seen before.
I'm Stephanie Young. This is Love Trapped. This season, an epic battle of he said, she said, and the search for accountability in a sea of lies.
I have done nothing except get pregnant by the Bachelor!
Listen to Love Trapped on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
podcast. Yeah, that counts as an intro. Look, yes, we've now started the podcast. The podcast that we are starting is It Could Happen Here, and it's me, Christopher Wong. I'm doing the host thing, and I have a bunch of other people with me who do a lot of things. I have Garrison.
Yes.
I have Shireen.
Yes.
And I have Sophie.
Our lovely boss, Sophie Lichterman. All praise on high.
Your words, not
Bow
mine.
down.
Your words, not mine. So weird. I did not enjoy that at all. Chris, want to take over?
So Sophie, unfortunately, lacks the sheer ruthlessness to crush the workers' movement.
Well, we will see.
Yeah,
that remains to be determined.
So,
oh,
I don't buy it. So Sophie is very sad. I'm sorry, Sophie.
Thank you.
But so when we last left off, Lenin has, like, in theory, crushed the last sort of remaining factions of, like, the workers' movement who want democracy at the factories. But unfortunately for the Leninists, like, literally no matter how many workers they kill, and they are going to kill enormous numbers of workers, the demand for democracy in the factory, like, just refuses to die. For over 100 years, the development of this sort of mass factory system and logistical infrastructure that you need to support it, maybe most importantly, coal mines and railroads that are used to transport stuff, generate this incredibly militant working class that sees, democratic control over the workplace as, like, the fundamental aspect of its liberation. Ideologically, this is manifested in, like, a series of interlocking beliefs about, like, the nature of the working class and, like, what class society is. All of which are sort of necessary components of this, like, what becomes this, like, incredibly, like, this, like, instinctive formation of workers' councils the moment, like, an uprising happens. And this is something that's very interesting about the 20th century is that, like, yeah, like, whenever there's, like, a crisis, someone's like everyone in the factory is like, okay, we've taken control of the factory now, like, we're forming a council, we're forming a giant assembly, and, like, we don't do this anymore. And we're gonna come back to, like, why we don't do this anymore, but, like, this hasn't happened. Like, the last time it happened was, like, in Argentina in 2001. And I don't even know if Garrison might have been alive for that.
Thanks.
But,
I will say the other time it does happen is when after a recording session, when our boss Sophie leaves, me and Chris will stay on the line to talk.
That's true.
Usually about Star Wars. And that, in a way, kind of is a workers' council just for the factory of podcasting.
Yeah.
Look, talk about Star Wars in front of me.
I feel so bad for Sophie.
next time we will.
His little puppy face.
It's okay. Thanks, Shireen.
Your petite bourgeois tactics won't work on me, Sophie.
Oh God, all the people on the subreddit who think that we hate Sophie are going to just have a field day with this episode.
Conspiracy
that
theory.
Is my favorite recurring conspiracy theory bit.
That's a real conspiracy?
Oh
man.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Wow, I have a lot of catching up on to do.
You do not.
No.
You do not, because it's not true.
Run away. So meanwhile, so in the period when people actually, like, did this seriously, there's a lot of sort of ideological things that come together to make it so that when people, like, when bread prices increase too much, this is what people do. And a lot of this has to do with the physical experience of what being a worker is in, like, the 19th and 20th centuries. Like, you have these incredibly rapid, like, technological expansions, and the people who are doing this stuff, like, see themselves as the creator of the new world, right? Like, and this, like, literally this is happening. Like, these are the people who are literally, like, they are building the cities, right? Like, all of the sort of the infrastructure of the modern world is physically being created by them, and this creates this, like, if you are the person who is, like, who has transformed, like, this fishing village into this giant industrial city, right? you see yourselves as the creator, like literally physically the creator of this new world that's being developed. And then the second belief that it produces that drives this movement is that the people who produce this world should be its inheritors. And so, this is what drives the workers' movement in this period, which is that, like, okay, so if you are literally physically creating the new world, and you think that because you have created it, it should be yours, the thing that you do, because it's not yours, right? Like, you don't, like, yeah, you know, the people who build cities are not the people who own the cities. And, you know, if you see this, okay, like the city is actually owned by like 3 real estate speculators and like a bunch of cops.
And more applicable examples, like the people who build the podcast does not own the podcast.
Yeah,
right?
No, we don't own the podcast. Like we are
exactly applicable result that everyone understands that example.
Yeah, I actually don't think that people understand that we don't own the podcast. It's actually unclear to me. People have weird things about how podcasting works, but yeah, we don't own the podcast. We just create it, and
we do all the work, and then Sophie sits in her leather chair, looking down at all
my
of the
leather chair.
All the podcasts
not a leather chair.
Look at all my podcast creations I have created, and then all of us
Climate
measly
change has
podcast
gotten
writers.
so bad. How could you think I could sit here on an 85-degree day in a leather chair? If you're going to insult me, at least get your facts right.
My word.
A leather chair. Continue, Chris.
Okay, so for the people who are like actually watching their boss like sitting around smoking a giant cigar in a factory while they pound like hammers or like work at a hospital and get a watch, like
Sophie's just started
that was so
picking
fast.
up a massive cigar and a comically large cigar.
Robert actually
Incredible
left
timing.
this for me to give to Prop, but
Because, for the record, whenever I do hang out with my other boss, Robert, he often does sit in some chair smoking a cigar.
and I do think it is in fact leather.
Okay, so we're describing Robert.
Yeah.
He forces me to slave away on my laptop writing scripts and
Yeah.
just sits in
Look,
his chair.
we work in the podcast mines.
Yeah, it is really hard out there.
Yeah.
And continue.
So like the belief that you produce the world and that if you produce it you should own it is like this is not unique to the part of the workers movement that like, you know, thinks that also you should like have a democracy in the factory and like you should have the autonomy to decide how you do your work and what needs to be done. Those beliefs like broadly comprise the ideology of like the entire workers movement. And by, you know, by the 20th century the workers movement is really, really broad, right? I mean, it stretches from sort of like really mild social democratic trade unionists to like the intellectual heads of these like Leninist vanguard parties. But what makes a democratic wing unique is that their concern is the fundamental alienation of factory life. And this is, I mean, originally like it is very much factory life, but like this gets expanded out as this goes on into sort of the fundamental alienation of labor itself, which is this condition of being reduced to an object by bosses who use you as a tool to do something. And, you know, and this is a concern for everyone in some sense, but for the Leninists and Social Democrats, alienation is just like a product of ownership or distribution, right? So, you know, if that's what you believe, the way you defeat alienation is through the working class and productive capacity, not in sort of like any kind of like innate human like humanity or creativity. Like all you have to do is like, well, okay, you flip a switch, right? And the factory is now owned by the state instead of being owned by like JP Morgan or something, and like now your alienation is gone.
That's how it works.
Yeah, or you know, social democracy, it's like, well, okay, so you flip a switch and taxes get higher, and now you have a union, but you're still working for the Goldman Sachs. But you know, but for the wing of the workers movement that, you know, actually cares about democracy, this doesn't solve anything, right? Like as long as the fundamental relation of being of being an object, right? As long as like you fundamentally, the worker, are not a human being who has agency and control and autonomy over their life. As long as you're just an object that, you know, like you are a living human tool that the one man ruler of the factory can like, can wield around to do whatever they want. As long as that persists, changes in ownership structure and like health benefits miss the entire point. And this kind of the degradation that comes from just being a tool can only be solved by returning agency and autonomy to the working class. And that means like actually giving the class control over the production process. And, in 1936 in Spain, workers are like, fuck this, and decide to take the entire thing into their own hands. And they do this by just seizing their workplaces en masse. And this becomes known as the Spanish Revolution. And it is one of the most extensive sort of experiments in like workers' democratic self-management, or like whatever you want to call people making their own decisions in the workplace, like that has ever happened. Like, especially in the modern era, like everything from like public utilities to like bakeries to hospitals to shoe factories, like falls under the direct control of these like democratic unions. And once their bosses have been like, chased from the premises and like flee in terror, these workers set about like transforming the entirety of Spanish society along democratic lines. Like they pool their resources together collectively, and they allocate them democratically for the benefit of like society as a whole. And for a brief moment, this works. They have this incredible, like this triumphant experiment in democratic self-management, and output increases dramatically, and social services are expanded. And like in the span of 2 years, in the middle of a civil war, like the workers of Spain are able to create a universal healthcare system that expands care into like rural areas of Spain where like you couldn't get it before. But, the problem is, once again, is that this is happening during a civil war, and a lot, like, using sort of like nominally anti-fascism, like as their sort of like, they're using the threat of the need to oppose fascism as a sort of front, like a front for what they're actually doing. You get this alliance of liberal socialists and Stalinists who just like brutally stamp out any attempt to do democratic self-management. And like you have like Soviet cadres and like NKVD, like Soviet secret police guys, like literally leading armies into these cities and like killing the workers, and then physically like taking control of these factories that people had seized and giving them back to the bosses. Which is, this is great. This is great communist stuff. And yeah, and this ends exactly how you would expect it to end, with like the Stalinists get everything they want. They murder all of the people who want like a factory council, and then they all get killed by Franco. But undeterred by sort of the casualty tolls of these like massacres by people who want bosses, this just keeps happening. And by the time you get to the 1950s and 1960s, like all this stuff is back. Like there's factory councils again in Hungary. You get them in Italy and France and like Czechoslovakia in 1968. There's there's councils being like there's communes being formed in like Vietnam. We've talked about the Cordones in Chile on the show before. Like these things are happening everywhere. And I think Hungary in particular is a really interesting one, because there's a revolution in Hungary against sort of the Soviets in 1956 it gets a lot of the same liberal mythologizing that you get with Tiananmen, but like kind of more egregious here. I don't know. I think like I got taught this revolution in school. This is like one of the few ones that we actually get. And they taught it as this, like, this is like the Hungarian Revolution was this like kind of nationalist, like liberal democratic revolution for people who wanted like democracy and freedom and like free markets. And then like, if you go read about what the people actually doing the revolution were saying, you get quotes like this. This is a direct quote from a member of one of the Hungarian workers' councils. "The time when the bosses decided our fate is over." And it's like, these guys do not seem like, I don't know. These guys don't seem like liberal Democrats. So something weird is happening here. There's something that's actually happening is that like Hungarian workers like seize control of their factories and like their workplaces, and they form workers' councils, and they overthrow the government, and then the Russians slaughter them all. But like this is not a liberal democratic revolution at all. This is a revolt against the dictatorship in the workplace. And there's identical revolts break out across both the capitalist world and the communist world, and in the newly decolonized societies, you start seeing them too. And, and to the sort of like dismay of both the communists and the capitalists, who are both like, oh my God, why is everyone keep forming workers' councils? Like, this solution to alienation, like, it's not like an ideological thing, right? Like, it's not that there's like a group of people who are like secretly infiltrating these countries and being like, okay, you need to form workers' councils. This stuff is happening in places where there's just like none of that. So like one of the sort of like movements that does stuff like this is the revolution in Algeria. And Algeria like does have a pretty high level of political education, but the political education they're getting is from like it's from the National Liberation Front, which is like, insofar as it's any one thing, it's a nationalist vanguardist movement, which is, they're the people who like fight the French colonizers and beat them. And their ideology, like, insofar as you can ascribe one ideology to them, like the thing that they want is like the state having this decisive role in national development. But, immediately upon taking power, Ahmed Ben Bella, who's Algeria's first president, like discovers that, he's not actually going to be the one like making the decision about what the country's economic structure is going to be, because he takes power and a whole bunch of like French people who live in Algeria flee. And basically what happens immediately after is that all of this property that had been originally like held by French sort of like colonists, like it gets immediately seized by the Algerian working class, and they build their own workers' councils, and Ben Bella is like, okay, I guess we have like workers' councils now, like I guess we have sort of like autonomous democratic production, and Ben Bella is like kind of trying to undermine them, but he doesn't really get a chance to, because once again there's a military coup, and Ben Bella like. I think he escapes and doesn't die, but like the fact that the councils all sort of get dismantled again. But like the number of times this has happened is getting just like completely out of hand. And it's like, yeah, okay, it's like, yeah, okay, so every time this happens, they murder everyone. But like, the revolutions keep happening and they keep happening and they keep happening. And even as late as like the late 70s, like it's not clear that like it's not clear that the people who want one-man rule in the factory are going to win. Like, there's this moment in Italy in 1977 where it's like this like giant student and worker coalition almost takes power. Like in Spain, even after like 50 years of like Franco and like the fascist dictatorship, like the CNT, which is the anarchist union that had done the revolution, like reappears in the 70s again, even though everyone thought it was gone. And like, this is a real source of strife for especially the sort of capitalist managerial elite who are, this stuff keeps happening. And it's like, okay, like it is an unacceptable risk that one day one of these groups is going to win. And so they start looking for a way to like dismantle this sort of like systemic things that like create that cause people to do this. But they're trying to do it in a way that doesn't involve them giving up their power. So yeah, as Vicky Osterwald points out, this sort of like this like instinctive embrace of like democracy in the factory, like as a political program, is only possible as long as like the factory functions as a point of encounter. I think it was her term for it, when she calls it a dark agora, which is like, so agora is like the sort of like the Greek marketplace in the center of a town. Everyone goes there and you like talk about things, right? And the factory serves as this kind of like, it's this sort of like dark version of it, where like, on the one hand, it facilitates these interactions that allow people to sort of like identify with each other and like, create collective meaning by like interacting with each other. But on the other hand, it exists to exploit you, and it's like terrible, and you're just getting, you're getting physically and socially destroyed like every moment you're in it. But, it still is a place where you can like assemble an identity as like you and a bunch of the people around you can go like, hey, like we are workers, right? Like we are the working class. And this is like a shared political identity that you have that allows you to do things. And so the thrust of sort of the attack against this takes the form of this attack on like the shop floor as like a site of like formation of identities that can allow you to like mobilize stuff. And so this takes like a number of forms. Most famously is it's deindustrialization and this sort of like spatial relocation of factories. So like part of what's going on, right, is that you have a bunch of people who work in a factory and then they live like around, like right around the factories, right? They work in a coal mine, and everyone lives in a town around the coal mine. And this means that everyone sees each other constantly and are like constantly like running into each other and like physically talking to each other. And, this is a really good way to create radical politics. So what happens is these factories get sent out to the suburbs, and this allows you to create places where workers are isolated from each other. And the other thing you can do is you turn workers into homeowners, And you sort of like buy them off with this combination of like cheap credit and this promise that like their houses will now be a financial asset. And so as the sort of 80s rolls on, the sort of the like the heralded democratization of finance replaces democratization in the factory as sort of the capitalist class. Like the other thing they do that's like really insidious is they tied like the remaining union pensions into the stock market. And this is stuff like you see this today with like 401ks. And it means that like if you want to like have a retirement, you are like physically, literally invested in the stock market, which ties everyone sort of like into the system. And corporations start to turn workplaces into these like enormous propaganda apparatuses. You get like Walmart in particular has these like these mass ideological like programming things that they run that are designed to sort of like get you to identify with like the corporation itself and not with like the other people the other people you're with in the class as a whole. And the other thing that they're able to do is the fact that capital is mobile and workers like aren't allows, combines with like logistics advances. And it means that like if workers ever start getting an upper hand somewhere, capitalists can just leave. And the process that you see is that as the sort of the total number of people working in industrial work keeps decreasing, right? As a percentage of the population, it keeps decreasing. And as this happens, capitalists are just like, okay, screw it. We're gonna pick up our tools and leave. And this spits out like enormous populations who are just like kicked out of the traditional workforce entirely. And these developments, this is what actually like eventually destroys the classical workers movement, is the ability to leave and the sort of destruction of the factory as like a site of stuff. But in order for this to work, the one thing they need is a place to move to, right? They need somewhere with this large exploitable labor supply that has been like crushed enough that it won't revolt against them. And the capitalist class finds that in our products and services. And we're back. We're back, and we're back to China. And okay, so I've been talking about the way this sort of like this whole system, like this whole factory system, mass production stuff like develops. But China's weird because this is the one place where the factory system works like really differently than everywhere else. And there's a lot of reasons for this. One of which is that like, so Chinese like state-owned firms, it's like almost impossible for them to fire someone because, I mean, there's a lot of reasons for this. So one of them is that like people's entire sort of social sphere is built around their work unit. And like their work unit is like, it's the company you work for. And there's this whole sort of like legal apparatus built around it. And it like, and like this like unit gives you everything from like your retirement to like it like feeds you, like there's often like entertainment stuff's like tied into it. Like you get healthcare, you get like childcare from it. And the CCP also gets rid of the piece rate system, which is this thing that like, I mean, there's a lot of capitalist places to work with this, where it's like, okay, so the piece rate system is you pay people for like every unit of something they produce. So like you get paid by like, I don't know, like how many pounds of like cherries you can pick. And so the USSR brings this back because the USSR and the US are really not that different. But China is like, nah, this like sucks. This is capitalism. And, okay, like I'm not gonna say the Chinese factory system is great, but like, because they don't have the piece rate system, is because they can't fire people. You get this you get this weird thing where it's like the people who run the factories like don't have very good ways to force people to work. And because of this, they sort of like have to allow this like degree of participation in the worker process, in the labor process that like you don't really see most other places. And the other thing they have that luckily Garrison and I also have this is we have the ability to criticize our bosses. Although we have more of this than these guys have. But one day.
Yeah, what do you got? Go ahead.
Okay, we've got it. We don't have our big character poster yet, but like one day Garrison and I are going to show up to the office with like giant big character posters with your faces on it that like have specifically Roberts are going to have a list of crimes on it. It's going to be great.
My favorite part of like big labor protests is when they make those giant like puppets.
Yeah.
The giant stick puppets.
Puppet me.
If we just make a giant stick puppet version of Robert and Sophie that we just parade around the office,
as long as mine's bigger than Robert's.
That's fine. We can do that.
Great. Great. Full support.
So we got to do this. In China, it's weird. Like you have the ability to do this, but like it's like run through the party. And so if someone gets unpopular enough, like the party will like start a campaign about how bad like that one boss is, and then you can show up to like the meeting and go like, hey, I hate my boss, this guy sucks. But then they just replace him with like another boss, right? So it's not like it's not actually a democratic system, really, but the way that it works ensures that like the people who are managers are like pretty popular, at least to some extent, like are popular, and people don't like really hate them. And this means that, you know, because there's all of this stuff that makes the Chinese factory system different from like the other systems, and also because of like structural stuff in Maoism that I mean, I could talk about that, but I don't like talking about Maoism. But basically, the product of this is that like you have in China during this period a lot of demands for democracy, but they're really they're not tied to the workplace at all. They're mostly like political demands for like democracy in the party or stuff like that. And that means like, you know, at least in the cities, the system like kind of works okay-ish until the Cultural Revolution, where everything falls apart. And this means that it is at long last time for me to do the Cultural Revolution rant, which is something I have been planning for like
Go for, I know you've been waiting for this.
I'm very excited about this. I've been waiting for an excuse, and I finally have one.
Give it to us.
The Cultural Revolution rant is that everyone gets the Cultural Revolution completely wrong. Like everyone, it's one of the rare events where like it's misinterpreted in like exactly the same way by both the people who support it and the people who oppose it. And okay, the first thing to understand about this, right, is like, okay, so the initial, the very, very beginning of the Cultural Revolution, like it's basically a bunch of like teenagers, kind of like it's like middle schoolers essentially, and they're attacking like other kids at their school. And these kids are kids who have what's called a black blood background, like black blood, which means that like they're the children of people who were from like quote unquote bad class backgrounds. And this is really weird for a number of reasons. One, because you have a sort of like a pseudo class system based on like who your parents were, right? You have people who have red blood who had like good class backgrounds, or like your parents are workers, or your parents worked with the party or something. And then you have people who are from like bad class backgrounds, quote unquote, who like are persecuted. And like, okay, like I don't really care that much if you're like persecuting like a Shanghai oligarch who like collaborated with the French and Japanese imperialists or whatever. But like, this extends to like the children of these people. And a lot of the children of these people like weren't even alive when their parents were like, you know, like doing stuff that was bad. And the other thing is that like the term bad class background, this is really loose. Like I know people whose families were declared like black class backgrounds, who have black blood, and like, you know, they weren't allowed to hold any government position. And the reason that this happened to them was that her dad had made bird feeders before the revolution, and they considered that like petit bourgeois. And it's like, this is like what are you doing? Like you've reproduced, like you've turned class into like a pseudo race thing that's like her, like you like inherit from your parents, even though like their parents don't own property anymore because you've done so. It's really bizarre. And what's happening here is the kids from the red class backgrounds are you know, they're the kids of the new Chinese elite. And they're just like picking on and attacking the kids who are like now this sort of like minority class. And so what it amounts to is the beginning of this is a bunch of privileged rich kids who are like attacking the bunch of kids who are being persecuted for stuff that's like not their fault at all. And, you know, the other part of this, like, this is the part that people I think get. It's like Mao is trying to like play power games inside the party, blah, 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 blah. But, you know, things get more and more chaotic, and you start getting these attacks on like CCP bureaucrats and cadres and stuff because Mao's trying to solidify his place in the party, and he's blah, blah, blah. There's other stuff that's happening. But then it gets really interesting. So this starts in 1966, right? And at the very beginning of 1967, there's something called the January Storm, which is where a bunch of rebel workers just seize control of Shanghai, and like they run the party out. I think they run the army out too. And, you know, and now like they control the city of Shanghai. And this is like an oh fuck moment for Mao, because, you know, now he has to like deal with this city that has been taken over by its own working class. And I found this incredible line from Zhou Enlai, who's having a meeting with Mao, and they're trying to figure out what to do about the fact that like this like that Shanghai has bin seized by these workers. And I'm just going to read this. When asked whether the new leadership should be elected from the bottom up, Zhou Enlai replied bluntly that, quote, anarchism is bound to develop if we immediately implement direct elections of the Paris Commune type. And I think this is this really incredible like thing you can find, right? Because it's like, okay, well, there's two things that can happen here. One is either like, okay, you give these people democracy and the ability to vote, right? And Zhou Enlai and Mao look at this and are like, that would be anarchism. We can't do that. And the second thing is you don't do that and you repress them. And they take the second line. And, you know, okay, like it takes them a bit to get this ramped up, right? It takes them a bit to get the sort of kind of revolution thing they're doing to like stop all of this rebel stuff that they've started to get it. It takes them about a year. But by 1968, the students and the workers who had like, you know, done this sort of uprising stuff start getting slaughtered, like just massacred, like killed on an unimaginable scale. This is where everyone gets the Cultural Revolution completely wrong, because the entire memory of the Cultural Revolution is from basically the first 2 years of it, right? Which is like all the stuff about like you know, like professors being marched out onto the street in dunce caps, and like students like humiliating the professors, and like party officials being like marched around with like placards on them, and like people like that's the stuff, and like the chaos of the revolution, like that's stuff everyone remembers. That's the first 2 years of this. There's still like, I mean, you can like there's the quote unquote short Cultural Revolution, which is like the high point of the activity, goes from 1966 to 1969. And then there's like a longer one that goes to like the death of Mao, depending on how you want to count it. But almost all of the actual violence in this period happens in this in the third phase, which is the first phase of the initial uprising, and then the rebel groups are fighting each other. But then phase 3 is when the state like cracks down on starts trying to crush this like rebel student factions. And I'm gonna read from Walder, who did so there's a guy named Walder who went to, he did a bunch of work in the Chinese archives where he like went and like found the death tolls. And I'm gonna read, like he goes to a bunch of archives, he goes to a bunch of state archives, and he like tracks down the death certificates and like tracks down like who died where. And this is what he wrote about it. More than 3/4 of all documented deaths in local annals are due to the actions of authorities in this third phase, and then more than 90% of those persecuted for alleged political crimes. So what he's saying here is that 75% of all of the deaths in the entire Cultural Revolution weren't done by like the revolution part. They were done by the state murdering the workers faction, the rebel factions. And not only that, 90% of the actual political persecution was done by the state and not by the rebels. And when you actually look at what this means, like this means everything anyone ever talks about the Cultural Revolution is completely wrong. It wasn't that, like, the thing that happened in the Cultural Revolution wasn't that sort of student radicalism got out of control and they started killing everyone and it produces all this violence. The thing that actually happens is that there's a student like uprising, right? But what happens is that the sort of conservative and state factions just slaughter them. And Walter estimates that the total number of people dead it's somewhere between 1.1 and 1.6 million people. And again, like 75%, and I think it's actually slightly higher than that, like percent of the people who were killed in this are killed by the state. And, you know, this has an enormous effect on, I mean, just everything that happens in Chinese society from then on, because on the one hand, the popular memory of the Cultural Revolution persists as this thing that was like, this is what happens if you like, if people outside the party and like students and radicals like start like making trouble, is that you get all these people dead. But then, you know, you have the people inside the state who like know how many people they had to kill in order to hold on to power, right? They kill probably more people than like there's a very famous massacre of like communists or like suspected communists in Indonesia that doesn't get called a genocide because it was technically on political lines, but like was one of the worst anti-communist massacres in history, and they killed more people than that during this period. And that level of violence and the fact that the people running the state understand what they had to do, it means you get an elite that's incredibly paranoid about like anything that like smells like organizing happening outside the party. And the other thing that happens is that like the most radical students and workers of this period just they're all dead, right? They killed like they killed like 1 million people. For every one person who got killed, there's about 19 people who were like persecuted in a lot of ways, and that's like a lot of these people are tortured, a lot of these people are like sent to prisons, they're like really horrible stuff happens to people, and this process keeps going like through the 70s. Like there's a huge spike in like state killings in 1970, and but by the end of the 70s, like anything that sort of like could have cohered into like a movement that like wants democracy in the workplace, for example, it's just gone, because all of the radicals, like and anyone who wanted democracy in the factory, any of the people who were like even sort of like just were like sort of rebellious, like these people have all been killed. And the consequence of this is that through the 80s, you get this politics that's driven by this like sort of like intellectual liberal democratic politics that completely ignores working class entirely. And these people start to take power, and you get Deng Xiaoping. Well, I think it's like right before he takes power, but Deng Xiaoping winds up implementing the one-child policy, which is this like incredibly draconian and really successful attempt to just like reestablish the state's like patriarchal control over the household, and strips like hundreds of millions of women from like of autonomy over their own bodies. And and it really looks like through like the late 70s and the 80s, it looks like the Chinese ruling class has succeeded, right? Like they finally destroyed like any opposition to them. But then things get very weird, which is that Tiananmen happens, and by 1989, like the whole like as a rule, like in general everywhere, the sort of classical workers movement that was like demanding democracy in the factory, like they're basically done, and so they're unable to sort of do their own revolutions. Now the only thing they can do is sort of like latch on to other stuff. But the problem that the party has is that so they'd had a lot of measures in place to try to make sure that you never got these kind of movements in China, and they kind of worked. But when it went through the 1980s, like China starts implementing a market economy, right? They start like cutting the welfare state. They start like destroying the sort of like limited control that workers had in the factories, and they kind of like unknowingly reproduced the conditions that have been producing these revolutions in every other country. And as this massive inflation wave hits, they turn China into this powder keg. And this combined with sort of like the liberal democratic students moving gets you this really interesting and weird ideology that these workers have. And I'm going to read it from an interview with one of the workers who was at Tiananmen. Why do a lot of workers agree with democracy and freedom? In the workshops, does what the workers say count, or what the leader says? We later talked about it. In the factory, the director is a dictator. What one man says goes. If you view the state through the factory, it's about the same. One man rule. Our objective is not very high. We just want workers to have their own independent organizations. In work units, it's personal rule. For example, if I want to change jobs, the bus company foreman won't let me go. I ought to go home at 5 p.m., but he tells me to work overtime for 2 hours, and if I don't, he'll cut my bonus. This is a personal rule. A factory should have a system. If a worker wants to change jobs, they ought to have a system of rules to decide how to do it. Also, these rules should be decided upon by everyone, and then afterwards, anyone who violates them will be punished according to the rules. This is rule by law. Now we don't have this kind of legal system. And, okay, that's a really, like... I don't know. I think it's a really interesting sort of like fusion of a whole bunch of stuff, right? Because on the one hand, like the sort of like ruling discourse that's happening, like the things the students are talking about is like that we need the democracy, we need the rule of law, but the workers in these factories are looking at like the situation they're facing, and they're like, we don't have a democracy like here either, right? And so you get what's a really conservative framing of the sort of very classical like critique of one man rule in the factory that has been happening for like 100 years. But what's interesting about this is that like any actual attempt to like do this, right, gets you to workers' control, like democratic workers' control in the factory. And as Walder also wrote, another, like, he's a guy who went and interviewed a bunch of the people who had been workers who had been involved with this. And as they point out, like, this, unlike really like any other time in Chinese history, like the people who are part of like the Beijing Autonomous Workers Autonomous Federation are, you know, they don't have an intellectual class. Like these are just a bunch of workers, and they have very little connection. Like they have very little like political connections, right? Like beforehand, like to the liberal circles, they're just sort of hearing what they're reading. And this means that like what you have here is like, it's not like an intellectual driven movement. Like this is just a bunch of workers. And for like one final time, their instinct when the revolution sort of like starts is to demand democracy in the factory. And this demand, like above all others, is completely politically unacceptable. And, you know, and when the army marches on Beijing, it's these workers that they wipe out. And they wipe them out so thoroughly that the fact that this is what these people were fighting for it's scrubbed from the record of the CCP. It's scrubbed, like the pro-democracy movement doesn't remember it, even though their entire thing is memory. And yeah, and this ensures that the meaning of these actual events, what these people were fighting for, what they were trying to do, has been almost completely lost. And I think at this point we can finally ask what actually was Tiananmen. And in some sense, in the Chinese context itself, it's a transition between two different Chinese working classes. These protests are sort of like, this is the last like political sort of like mobilization of like the old Chinese working class, which has been these people who had been in the cities, who had been like they'd been the beneficiaries of this old sort of like socialist period welfare state. And these people in the streets around Tiananmen, they mount the last attack of the classical workers movement. And when they lose, this entire class, like this entire urban working class that had been around since like the 1920s, that had been sort of the driver of Chinese radical politics, that had been like that had been fighting and striking for like 70, 80 years, they're gone. They're completely destroyed. And over the course of the economic restructuring in the 1990s, they cease to exist as a class, and they're replaced by a new Chinese working class, which is drawn from sort of these rural and sort of semi-urban underclasses of the old social system, who are dragged into the cities from their villages, from their towns, and who now fill. Actually, well, I don't know what the numbers are today, because it's weird because of COVID, but like in 2019, there were 277 million of these people, of this enormous migrant worker like force, who form the backbone of like the entire Chinese working class. And these people who they have rural household registrations, and this means that they don't get any of the benefits, like the sort of like welfare benefits that you would get from living in a city. And this means that they're, you know, they constitute like an entirely new class of workers. And instead of, you know, like whatever sort of privileges had been like carved out by the old working class, this one gets nothing. And the other thing that they get is this entire raft of sort of capitalist ideology that's baked into like every aspect of their workplace culture. This is massive attempt in China to get people to buy homes. And, you know, like where the old working class could at least like posit the factory as like a place where you could have democracy, where like life could be improved by like different controlled factories. Like, this new working class, like the thing that they want the most is to leave the factory and become a business owner. And, you know, like this probably sounds familiar to like us, right? Like this is the old joke about about the American working class, which is that everyone sees themselves as temporarily embarrassed millionaires. And like, yeah, you know, in modern China, it's like, yeah, okay, it's like people consider themselves to be like temporarily embarrassed small business owners. And this stuff, this ideological self-conception of like, I'm going to work in the factory, that I'm going to become a small business owner, is completely inimical to the formation of like the classical workers movement. And there hasn't been that kind of formation in China since. And this is not really a unique thing, right? The death of that workers movement has seen a sort of like complete and total collapse of the demand for like democratic self-management, like everywhere across the entire world. And, you know, incredibly stubbornly, like the working class like refuses to sort of cohere itself in the factory. And so in this sense, China is really just sort of late to the game. They got slightly early. They got slightly later to the point that we're at now.
You said there was going to be a happier ending for this.
The happy ending was last episode. This episode is this episode's ending is really depressing. Well, I mean, okay, there's a slightly less depressing note, kind of. Okay, the thing that's less depressing here is that for my entire lifetime has been the U.S. lurching from one economic collapse to another, and the world, like the international economic system. Like I think I was born in like the middle of like the .com collapse. And then I got 2008, and then like there's been a bunch of economic collapses in the last like 3 years. And, you know, the whole system has like lurched from crisis to crisis to crisis. And that means that there's been an incredible, just like a rapidly increasing number of revolutions everywhere, even though the sort of like dark agora of the factory like has ceased to be this thing that like creates the working, like the identity of the working class. And this means that, you know, okay, so in order to have some kind of mass movement, you need some kind of collective identity to mobilize around. And, you know, if you can't make this in the factory, the place where it's going to be made instead is the street. And this means in the last, you know, like 20-ish years, without the sort of positive identity in the workplace to cohere itself around, workers are really only able to sort of mobilize on a mass basis, like indirect opposition to a threat that can confront like everyone at the same time. And this is the only thing that can do this is really the state. And, you know, the state has the ability to increase the price of basic commodities and slash welfare benefits. And that becomes the only available enemy. And so, yeah, if you look at what revolutions have been in the last 20 years, it's a constant fight against the police, because fighting the police is the only thing that can allow you to create a new social identity, like a sort of collective identification. And, you know, and so this means that collective, like modern revolts, like everything we've seen over the last like 4 years, the form that it takes is mass street movements and, you know, continuous confrontation with the police. And you get to literally see this with Occupy, right? Occupy was originally like the slogan Occupy was about the Argentinian factory occupations in 2001. But then, you know, that stops. Like that's the end. Like 2001, like that's the end of the whole cycle. There's no more factory occupations. Well, actually, that's not true. You get one in Bosnia Herzegovina, which is funny because it's like they occupy a bunch of factories, but like they don't know what to do with them, and so you get just like a regular like Occupy, like in the sort of like square occupation you'd get in like New York or whatever, where everyone's sort of like sitting in a circle and talking about stuff, but it's happening in a factory. But they're not like trying to run production. They're not trying to do any of that stuff. They're just sort of like there in it. The factory is no longer this sort of like space of like creation and possibility that could like be turned into something new. It's just like a place where you go that's like indistinguishable from like a square. And, you know, for the last 10 years, it's like people originally it was like it just left, right? So everyone's occupying squares. But, you know, by about 2014, people have figured out that you can't, like, it's almost impossible to hold a square if the police attempt to run you out. And so this gets replaced with running street fights with the police. But this, you know, this places everyone who's trying to do this in this incredibly dangerous bind, because, you know, the old workers' councils were able to bring down states. Like, largely they got crushed by outside militaries, but they were able to bring down states because, you know, there is an enormous amount of power in being able to control production. But the problem is that, like, you know, if you're in a square, right, like, you don't have the ability to do that. And without the factory occupations alongside them, there have been a lot of general strikes in the last 4 years. There's one in Peru, there's one in France, there's some in Hong Kong and Sudan, and every single one of them has been crushed. But, you know, but this is a real problem, right? Because the current labor conditions aren't going to produce another wave of factory occupations. And so the way forward for anyone who, like, you know, wants to have a democracy in the workplace is completely unclear. And I think that's the actual legacy of Tiananmen. The workers who are assembled outside Tiananmen Square had already left their factories. And, for all that they spoke the language of the old workers' movements, right? They spoke of democracy in the factory and one-man rule. They stood and fought and died like we do in the streets. They're this bridge between sort of the classical workers' movement and us. And, they face the same revolutionary crisis that we face, the crisis of Papua and Palestine and Colombia and Iran and Myanmar and Hong Kong. There's this crisis of victory that's just beyond the horizon, can't be grasped. I don't think the people at Tiananmen have any answers to give us. I don't think they do. I think they ran headlong into the crisis that we ran into, and they all died. Yeah, and I think expecting answers from the dead is demanding too much of those who, before and after us, died fighting for liberation. And all we can really do now is find our own way, when with the names of the dead on our lips, build the world they died fighting for.
Hey, we'll be back Monday with more episodes every week from now until the heat death of the universe.
It Could Happen Here is a production of Cool Zone Media. For more podcasts from Cool Zone Media, visit our website, coolzonemedia.com, or check us out on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can find sources for It Could Happen Here updated monthly at coolzonemedia.com/sources. Thanks for listening.
Hi, it's Jill Winterstein, host of the Spirit Daughter podcast, where we talk about astrology, natal charts, and how to step into your most vibrant life. And today I'm talking with my dear friend, Krista Williams.
It can change you in the best way possible. Dance with the change, dance with the breakdowns.
The embodiment of Pisces intuition with Capricorn power moves.
So I'm delusionally proud of my chart.
Listen to the Spirit Daughter podcast starting on February 24th on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
I'm Amanda Knox, and in the new podcast, Doubt, the Case of Lucy Letby, we unpack the story of an unimaginable tragedy that gripped the UK in 2023. But what if we didn't get the whole story?
Evidence has been made to fit.
The moment you look at the whole picture, the case collapsed.
What if the truth was disguised by a story we chose to believe?
Oh my God, I think she might be innocent.
Listen to Doubt, the Case of Lucy Letby on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is Special Agent Regal, Special Agent Bradley Hall.
In 2018, the FBI took down a ring of spies working for China's Ministry of State Security, one of the most mysterious intelligence agencies in the world.
The Sixth Bureau podcast is a story of the inner workings of the MSS and how one man's ambition and mistakes opened its vault of secrets.
Listen to The Sixth Bureau on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Clayton Echard. In 2022, I was the lead of ABC's The Bachelor.
But here's the thing. Bachelor fans hated him.
If I could press a button and rewind it all, I would.
That's when his life took a disturbing turn. A one-night stand would end in a courtroom.
The media is here. This case has gone viral.
The dating contract.
Agree to date me, but I'm also suing you.
This is unlike anything I've ever seen before.
I'm Stephanie Young. Listen to Love Trapped on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed Human.